Yeah, we're off.
Get ready to make a choice between two matches.
I really think I could fall for it.
With an explosive twist.
I get to date two guys at the same time.
The Stan original dating series, Love Triangle. Every Thursday, only on Stan.
Before the Winston family arrives, I've made some sun-sensitive upgrades, like made-to-measure blind shutters and awnings. Don't get burnt. Order now and...
I can't get on the thing. Oh, there it is. Hi, Gigabyte. Good to see you. Hi, Han. Yeah, Han, I had a really high fever for 2 days. It broke last night, and I felt better about 11 o'clock. It was a hard 2 days, though.
Folks, I am not engaging in any type of hyperbole here. This is the most intense account of a person interacting with what I only can assume is a hybrid entity. And it is absolutely off the charts. I mean, I've heard a lot of things. I've interviewed a lot of people in my day. This one takes the cake.
Not
really
Han.
does. And
Not
it goes
Jen.
back to Dr. David Jacobs' book, Walking Amongst Us. They are here. And they're starting to...
No, Han, the fever broke about 11 o'clock last night, and I got a good sleep in and had a shower, and I'm back to normal. But, yeah, that's the first time I've had a fever in about 10 years. Made me really sick. I was shivering and everything.
manifest, and this happened this year.
Yeah,
So
I'm
we're
over it,
gonna have
Han.
First, a word from our sponsor. All right, folks, is investing in silver today a good idea? Colin Plume from our friends at Noble Gold thinks so. We had Colin on the show last month, and the reason why I did this, they're a trusted sponsor, but I've invested my money with Noble Gold. A good portion of the cash that we had on hand, we converted into precious metals, and I'm not telling you to do anything that I'm not doing myself. Okay, so on the national desk, Colin explains there had been a huge sell-off of silver because of its low price right now. Silver is the most useful industrial metal out there, and demand is soaring for electronics and electronic cars, solar panel circuits, as the green agenda begins to speed up. As industries pick up after the pandemic supply chain issues, the trend down should reverse quickly and silver may rocket. Now that's, he doesn't have a crystal ball, nor do I, but it certainly could go up. Folks, don't miss this. Give the team at Noble Gold a call and join thousands of others, including myself, who've taken advantage of the split in the market. They'll guide you through the process and make it easy for you. And this month, you'll get a stunning free 3-ounce silver American Virtue coin with a qualified IRA of $20,000 or higher. Folks, you can't go wrong with Noble Gold, and that's why we put our money in with Noble Gold. I believe it may be the safest place to put your cash right now. Call the team, 877-646-5347, 877-646-5347, or visit noblegoldinvestments.com, noblegoldinvestments.com. Folks, tell them L.A. Marzulli sent you. This really is the most chilling episode with an entity I've ever heard of, and I've already stated that, but I'm reiterating it. It's no hyperbole on my part, and when you hear the testimony, I think you'll agree. Let's roll the tape. I'll weigh in on the other side. So I'm here with Christian, and he's in Norway, and through the miracle of Zoom, and of course accounting for the time change, and this is one of those interviews where we actually got the times right. Oftentimes it's like, I'm off by 3 hours or 6 hours or whatever, but this time we got it right, and I applaud you, sir. But getting serious here, you had an encounter with an entity, a hybrid entity. Tell us about that, please.
I didn't hear that, Han, but I just read Germany's had an embassy bombed, apparently.
Yes. It was later before summer vacation started in Norway at the 7th of June this year. And myself, me and my wife were just going on some regular grocery shopping at a pretty nice grocery shop a couple of miles from our hometown in southern Norway. So everything seemed fine. It was about 9 o'clock in the morning, and we were just going through the door sliding open, and there was no one in this section of the shop. So I just do what I usually do, try to
Oh, they got it
look at
out,
the
did they?
grocery stores holding, or what you perhaps you would call it, vegetable stands or something like that. And then something.
Okay, that's not good for the stereo.
So let me ask you something. Your wife is with you,
Yes.
and did she have the encounter also, the
Oh
confrontation?
yes, she
Okay.
did.
So this is, let me just back up. This is normalcy 101. This is like you're in a grocery store, you're not looking for anything, you're not expecting anything, you're at the vegetable stands. I mean, this is ordinary as you can get, but then something extraordinary happens. Tell us about that.
Yes, well, it's just like you said. We were not expecting any trouble. Just going to buy some potatoes, some vegetables, some meat, and something for the dinner later afternoon dinner. But when I just put my head in the forward position, just out in the open room of the store, it was just us. No, it was no person behind us. No persons in the rear of the shop either. It was really early in the morning, so. And then suddenly, this tall woman, just eyeballs me, really getting eye contact. And I was like, wow, that's kind of ordinary. I'm just there with my wife, so why is she eyeballing me, you know? And then she just kept a stone hard face, just piercing me with her yellow eyes. And then I understand, wow, is this in camera or something? But because a person looking at you with such perfect hatred, that's kind of a normal, because I've never seen her before. She hasn't done me anything. And then she's just moving towards us. I would describe it like slithering, like a snake. And my wife also, she really gets really nervous and scared at that moment, because she was perhaps 15 feet away from us. And then at 9 feet in front of us, she starts to doing strange movements. I couldn't really see her feet, but I have given you an description and also a personal drawing of this woman. So that's now the brain fog starts making me dizzy and my wife dizzy, and my wife gets so scared. She's just crouching behind the vegetable stands just before this woman lifts up her skirts and flashes her genitals at us. And I barely managed to, use our neck. God has blessed us with us, our guys, with necks. So we shouldn't watch another woman, no. So God has given us our neck so we can turn our eyes away from temptation. And then my wife, at this point, is very scared, so she starts laughing behind the vegetable stand, and she doesn't know why she's laughing. And then she flips up her skirts, flash her genitals, and I turning my head away, and I understand this is what you have taught me, the brain fog, okay? Shoot first, ask questions later. So I start to rebuke this woman. I can't manage to speak because I'm kind of paralyzed, so I have to think it in my mind. So I go, okay, in the name of Jesus. And then she starts wriggling a bit and
wow,
takes her hands down, and her dress goes down above her genitals, and then she makes a very strange U-turn I can't see her feet moving. She's like floating.
Wow.
So that was scary. And then my wife started peeking up behind the vegetables and it, wow, like is she gone? And I need a moment here. And then suddenly she shoots away to another part of the store. And then when that happened, I remember what you have said, right? You have to clear your mind, speak in tongues, try to encourage yourself in the name of Jesus. And then, boy, now I was in real fight mode. So I just told, in the name of Jesus, be gone. And then, poof, gone she was. I don't know where she went. It was like, poof, she was gone.
Wow.
Let me go back. I want to deconstruct this. I want to ask you some questions. This is an incredible story. What time of the morning was it?
It was 9 o'clock in the morning. A beautiful Norwegian summer day.
Okay.
Mm.
No one else in the market, no one else in your aisle. All of a sudden, she appears.
Yes.
How tall is she?
I would estimate approximately 6.1 foot. That's almost 187 centimeters. So I would say I'm a trained witness. I was for decades trained myself to judge distances, people's height, weight, so forth. And I also have a master's degree in chemistry. A master's
Hi,
degree in
Lynn.
pharmacy.
Good to see
I
you.
do a lot of observations in the lab. So I would say I would perhaps qualify as a trained witness, perhaps some kind of trained witness.
So she's over 6 feet tall.
Yes, it's at least 1 inch taller than me.
Okay.
So I like, wow. And she had this most strange clothes I've ever seen.
Now, was the hair shoulder? Was it blonde, platinum blonde?
Yes, it was platinum blonde and above the breast height.
Okay.
So it was
down around here.
Yes.
Okay.
And what struck me was the kind of, or the quality of the clothing. It was like the finest linen I've ever seen. It was interwoven with gold threads. You know, I'm a guy, I can't speak it, but that's what I saw. I know what gold thread looked like. So it was interwoven, fine interwoven, vertical and horizontal, and interwoven with the finest linen blue threads I've ever seen. And it was semi-permeable. So you can see partly through her clothes.
Was she wearing a skirt or a dress? What was she wearing?
Yeah, she was wearing kind of a top going to the elbow, and then she was wearing a top below her bosom, and then it was some kind of permeable, semi-permeable clothes just above her knees. So it was kind of revealing, to put it mildly.
Okay. So did she say anything? Did she verbalize anything at all?
No.
Okay.
It was just the stone hard, cold eyes, bright yellow eyes.
Now, let me stop you there. When you say yellow,
yeah,
were there any whites in the pupils, or was it all yellow?
I saw just yellow. Perhaps it was. I didn't manage to get that. I couldn't see any whites. It was just large yellow eyes.
Now, were the eyes larger than a normal human being, or were they the same size and just yellow?
A little bit bigger.
A little bit bigger. Okay.
Yes. And that was
any makeup?
No, I couldn't see any makeup.
Okay.
It was flat skin, very prudent cheekbones. So it was kind of, you know, if you look at some pictures of some alien figure from, for example,
like a
tall, the alien figures.
Right.
Oh, thanks, Han.
So
That's very
makeup, high
sweet.
cheekbones, larger than normal eyes that are yellow, striking blonde hair.
Yes.
Was she wearing any jewelry?
No, I don't think so. But she did wear some strange boots, or should I say, on her feet. It looks like, people might perhaps laugh at me, but it looked like some kind of Star Trek boots. I couldn't really see her feet because that part, the lower part of her feet were blurry. I don't know why. It's very strange.
Okay, so the feet are blurring, which comes at you. You said she began to slither like a snake. Now,
Yeah.
I'm assuming she's not on the ground. She's like walking to you, but she's undulating, or what did that look like?
The best thing I can say, she was levitating perhaps a couple of inches above ground. And that's my white words exactly. Wow, she is slithering like a snake. That freaked her out.
How close was she to you?
At the closest, she was perhaps 5-6 feet.
No, that's very close.
Yeah, so that's pretty close. And then I just managed to turn my head before she did her thing with her skirt. And then the brain fog was kind of scary because you have to experience it to know. But as I've said, you have talked about this in your video, so I know what to do.
Thanks, guys.
Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. Praise God. It's amazing. People don't understand, but when you're in close proximity with an entity like that, it's like these are not the droids you're looking. Your brain's not working anymore, and you experienced that. But thank God you knew what to do. So when you said the name of Jesus,
It bolted.
and the feet are blurry, she's levitating, she's coming at you. Tell us exactly how she leaves the scene. So you go, in the name of Jesus. What does her face do when you're thinking that?
Well, actually, I was kind of afraid to turn my head against her once more because I didn't know if he still was naked, So I was trying to aim high with my eyes, and I looked at her as she turned, and she turned her head, now wildly angry. Because, when you see a person is angry, they kind of,
you can see the
eyes
facial
start,
expression. Sure.
Yes, the eyes starts, and she makes some strange movements in her face. I don't know how to describe them without the perfect hatred, the perfect anger. And then she turns wildly fast, so fast, like a U-turn,
Right.
like taking them slithering away so fast.
Now, when you say slither, what do you describe that? Because a snake is on the ground and it's slithering, so she's not on the ground on her belly, but somehow you're looking at this and you're using the word slither. Describe that, please.
It was kind of like a catwalk woman, doing her thing on a catwalk and then slithering as she goes from side to side. So that's the best explanation I can give you, I'm afraid. It was so crazy.
She didn't take steps, she slithered. Wow.
My head just stopped working, and I thought, wow, what am I experiencing right now? But because of what you have said in your videos, it was kind of just turning on the switch, the name of Jesus, and then something cleared up, and she turned up, and she's shot away.
Now, when you say shot away, describe that. I mean, is she walking, or does she just go zip like that?
I would just say zip like that. If you've seen on the in the arcade halls, it's kind of air hoverboard, with smoke pucks. And it was just almost like that, and she just shot away above the ground without walking.
Did you see her again?
No, I just, as she turned away, shot up the other part of the shop, perhaps as far as 50 feet or something. I managed to get 1/2 second of eye contact, where she just like stared at me with so much hatred, and then boom, she was gone, just gone.
Now, when you say gone, so she's standing in front of you, about 50 feet away.
Yes.
She moved behind a shelf. Did she just disappear? How did she leave?
All right. It was kind of a big gap on the shelf. It was several meters across where I can see her. And she was standing in the middle of the opening. So it was several meters on each side.
On each side, okay.
Yeah, so it's kind of hard to describe when a person just like that is gone. She was there in 1 second and whoa, where is she? She couldn't possibly have moved several meters.
I wonder why she showed up to him. Like, this is in a shopping centre, so why did she show up to him, I wonder?
Seconds.
Right.
She was just gone.
So you got eye contact with her. You see her. She looks at you once again, complete hatred.
Yes.
Then she's gone. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes.
Without putting words in your mouth, did she just disappear, or do you think she moved quickly behind? What do you think happened?
Well, I did look at her and just trying to, hurry up to see if she's gone to another part of the shop. But there is no one. She's gone. She couldn't possibly have moved so quickly in just that 1 or 2 seconds. It's impossible. She wasn't there.
So what did you do? Now she's gone. I'm assuming you're comforting your wife. Did you talk about it with her?
Yes. Now we were starting looking over our shoulders, because have anyone else seen this? Are there some people in this shop that perhaps have seen this? And because we were just standing perplexed. What did we just witness? So we just, looking around, what's happening? But there was none other in the shop right then. So she was not on any other part of the shop. She's gone. And then I have to say to my wife, this is what I talked about. This is what I've heard from the Christian YouTuber I've been following for so many years. He's warned me. I tried to warn you before this happened, but she said, I wasn't prepared.
Right. And you never are. I mean,
no.
Look, I'm not, I do this all day long and I'm not prepared. I don't want to see anything. I have no desire to have an encounter with a hybrid or UFO, none at all. But I do the research and I warn of what is here. There's a book by Dr. David Walking Amongst Us, and he talks about they are integrating, and people don't believe that. That's impossible. Your testimony, Christian, is vital because it shows us that the phenomenon is very all too real, and that the entities are, in my opinion, in a fixed state. The fact that she looked at you with unmitigated hatred is incredibly telling. She's from the other side, there's no doubt. Any other thoughts?
Other thoughts is that I would say the same as you. I never ever wanted this kind of experience ever, because frankly it's terrifying. You're saved. The blood of Jesus is protecting you. But I've written several books in Norwegian on the end times. I completely share your view on the end time layout. The coming great deception, and as you say, it's burgeoning and not going away. I do believe that, and I have so much resistance and also persecution, even from other Christians, for just writing some of those books. So thank you, and your crew for what you're doing, and also thank you to the late Dr. Chuckness.
Yeah, he was a mentor to me. I miss him. He left all too early. And what's not problematic, but what's very sobering is it's like, I'll be 72 in December. Chuck died when he was 82. That's only 10 years away. So this is why we do what we do here. Do the daily shows. We talk to people like yourself. The third film in our UFO series is we're doing a pre-sale on it. We're working on number 4, which is on the abduction phenomena, which is incredible. And Christian, thank you so much for coming on the record. Thank you for your boldness and your courage. May the Lord bless you. And
Interesting
protect you. The stories
testimony.
like this, which are vital,
Mm.
and that needs to get out, and that's why we're doing this show, Supernatural Confrontations. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
So there you have it. What do we make of that? And what's there's more questions I need to ask, and I will probably revisit the scene. I don't believe the entity was wearing any undergarments. The garment that she was wearing was unlike anything the witness had ever seen before. It's very bizarre. Couldn't see the feet. The thing floated back and forth, kind of undulated like a snake. What does that really mean? It'd be interesting to try to get some kind of a visual. Looked at the couple with absolutely unmitigated hatred. Look, they're in a fixed state. The hybrid entities are soulless. In our new film, number 3, Close Encounters, we have a gentleman. I think I posted that last week. You need to watch that because it's unbelievable. And the little gray is there, and he says it's like they're soulless. It's like looking into the eyes of a rattlesnake. Well, it's the same thing. They're encountering this female, and she's glaring at them with just unmedicated vitriol, unmitigated hate. And they are in a fixed state. They are soulless, in my opinion. Look, you can believe me or not. It doesn't really matter. I'm manning my post. I'm doing what I'm supposed to do.
Yep.
Dr. David Jacobs' book, Walking Amongst Us, is a must-read. Absolute must-read. He's a historian, was working at Temple, as professor of history at Temple University, was trained under
Hey,
John
Dad,
Hall.
good to see you.
Yvonne Smith, who we associate with, knows Dr. David Jacobs. I've interviewed him several times. He's a great guy, but his worldview, in my opinion, is opposite of Christianity. He doesn't believe in anything supernatural. So he's afraid of what's going on. He believes that the breeding program is real. It's
Good to see you
it's
back,
comparative.
Di. I had
do
2
too.
days off
We
with
just have different
some sort of fever.
conclusions. I believe this is the work of the fallen one. We can read about this in Daniel. Their seed will mingle with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave to them. I keep going back to that because that's the scripture for the time that we're living in right now. Folks, the supernatural is real, all too real. And the testimony that you just heard, in my opinion, was riveting.
It was good.
And they are getting bolder. And this happened this year. So it's starting to ramp up a little bit. If you've had a supernatural confrontation, please email us, supernatural@lamarzulli.net. Give us like a paragraph. You don't have to give us 3 pages, just a paragraph of what you want to talk about. And our producer, John Adam, will get back to you on that. I promise we will. We're trying to do a bunch of interviews this week to keep ahead of the curve. Anyway, folks, here's the Watchman Conference. Spiritual warfare will be happening this week. Go to hearthewatchman.com.
Nah, Diane, my fever broke about 11 o'clock last night. I got up this morning, I felt really good, had a shower, and I'm completely back to normal. It's been a long time since I had a fever where I was shivering. It was very unpleasant.
There is a hidden history that has been deliberately obfuscated from the peoples of the world, and that's why I am on the trail of the Nephilim. The Genesis 6 narrative states that the Nephilim are on the earth in those days and also afterwards. If that's true, can we find evidence that corroborates this? I'm L.A. Marzulli. Join me as we go on the trail of the Nephilim. Hey, folks, a very special presentation. I was interviewed by my good friend, Timothy Alberino. We've been on some adventures together. It's pretty cool. And Tim shared me the link, which is on YouTube. It's already got like 42,000 hits or something like that. So we're going to share it right here after a word from our sponsor, virtual.
It's the first time I've had a fever since I don't know when. I felt unwell before, but that was sort of side effects of drinking, I think. But this is some sort of virus. Very unpleasant.
Shield. Check this out. The U.S. warned citizens to prepare for a possible Russian cyber attack. Hacking is a key tool for Russia these past 2 years. The biggest cyber attacks against U.S. infrastructure have been linked, you got it, to Russia. Your own personal data has never been more vulnerable than now. This is why I highly recommend Virtual Shield VPN. Virtual Shield helps protect your online identity by making you anonymous online. This means ISP hackers or big tech companies will have a hard time seeing what your browsing activity actually is. Folks, I got to tell you, I can't recommend this highly enough.
Diane, you know how they had the housing crisis in 2008? I think it was there. You guys had that housing crisis. Well, apparently the car loaning industry is set up exactly the same as what happened with the housing loans. Yeah, so not looking good.
If you've been looking for a way to browse the internet anonymously, you'll love Virtual Shield VPN. Try Virtual Shield for free by going to the website or visiting the link below. This month they're offering a 50% off for life for all free trial signups. Download Virtual Shield today. Please go to the link below and check it out. That's virtualshield.com/LA, virtualshield.com/LA. Quick reminder before we roll with the interview that Tim and I did. I think you'll find that pretty interesting. There's a lot of good comments on his site, but you can watch it right here. Our first show will be aired on PTL tonight, Friday night, 11 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, 8 o'clock on the left coast. That's episode 1, all things Nephilim. It'll dovetail into what we're doing here. And please consider, if you can, just watching it, telling a friend about it. We're trying to build an audience over there. There's 9 million people on that network. I'll be happy if we get 30 or 40,000 people watching it. It'll be a lot more than what we're getting on YouTube. But I digress. Anyway, folks, here's the interview, and we'll see you on Monday morning.
Okay, I should have got rid of the glare.
I am very pleased to be talking with a man who needs no introduction to my audience. The intrepid author, researcher, and filmmaker.
Hey, Trace, good to see you.
L.A. and I have known each other for quite some time now and have had the opportunity to collaborate on several projects over the years. We will be discussing one such project today. But before we begin, I would like to remind everyone of my upcoming Birthright Conference, taking place in Nashville, Tennessee, from the 6th through the 7th of May. The conference will feature topics related to transhumanism, aliens, UFOs, and Bible prophecy. Tickets are currently 20% off. You can find a link to purchase tickets in the description of this video or on my website, timothyalberino.com. The VIP tickets are nearly sold out, and the general admission tickets are going fast. So don't delay if you want to attend. As always, I would also like to direct you to my book, Birthright, The Coming Post-Human Apocalypse and the Usurpation of Adam's Dominion on Planet Earth. Birthright continues to be a 5-star bestseller on Amazon with over 800 reviews. It covers everything from the galactic rebellion in the pre-Adamic past to the creation of mankind on planet Earth, the fall of the Watchers in the pre-flood world to the machinations of Luciferian forces in modern times, the unveiling of the alien presence to the final battle at Armageddon. Pick up a copy of Birthright on Amazon.com.
Reboot it, Trace, because it seems to be going okay here.
Hey, thanks for having this conversation with me today. The last time that you and I were together, I believe,
there it is.
was in
cool.
2019.
2019, that's it, down in Peru.
As my audience is very much aware, you've been doing research into the elongated skulls, specifically the elongated skulls in Paracas, Peru, for some time now. Why don't you give us a description of what you've been doing and what you've been finding and what conclusions you've drawn from the data?
Well, first of all, Tim, it's always good to be here. I wish we were a little closer instead of on Zoom here, but it is what it is. And, COVID shut everything down for 2 years, so things are beginning to loosen up. And I will be at the Hear the Watchman conference in Dallas, shameless plug, from the March 17th to the
Okay, this is on March.
20th. No masks, no mandates, no vax passports. So come on down. It's going to be a hoot. It's going to be good, and I'm excited about that. First conference
Oh
in
man,
2
look
years.
at the glare.
But, you and I were down there in 2019, and we went to a place that I had never been before, the Reserve, deep into the Reserve. I mean, I was on the outskirts of the Reserve, but you need, not just anybody can go into the Reserve. And we were with an archaeologist that you had, hooked up with, and he showed us some really interesting.
Welcome back, Ann.
Interesting artifacts, interesting places, which connected some dots for me, and I know connected dots for you too. In 2013, someone sent me a YouTube video, and in that YouTube video was Brian Forrester, and Brian was standing in front of a display case filled with elongated skulls, and he was reaching back, taking skulls out, and I'm just going like, you've got to be, who is this guy, and how can he possibly do that? And so I reached out to him, which resulted in our first trip. It was Richard Shaw, of course, the director of the Watcher series. That became a best-selling DVD for us. We still have it on our site, lamarzulli.net. Aaron Judkins was our first, no, Judd Burton was our first archaeologist on that trip. Ron Moorhead was an adventurer who had been studying Bigfoot, and he wanted to come down because he was wondering about the elongation of the skulls, because the Bigfoot that he had seen in the reports, they all have elongated skulls. And then Joe Taylor was down there to mold some of the skulls. This is one of Joe Taylor's molds, just incredible work. Yeah, so we go down there, and it was like going to school for a week. I mean, literally, because I'm not trained as an archaeologist. John Burton was. So we learned about things like, I'll do it on this side, the zygomatic arch right here. We learned about the sagittal suture, or lack of the sagittal suture. We learned about the parietal plate, which is the parietal plate should be here. There should be a sagittal suture going down, splitting the parietal plate. And then, of course, on the back, the occipital plate. So, we were in school learning all these terms, learning how they all, like the mandible, the lower jaw, just all these different technical terms that you learn in anatomy. And we got to handle the skulls. We didn't take any samples back for DNA, that was our first trip. We went back down in 2014, and we took hair samples from the baby mummy right behind me. And we were able to unwrap it on that trip also. And that's all in the film, Final Results DNA, which, again, lamarzulli.net. So the whole idea was, there's two schools of thought here. One is that these are all the result of cranial deformation, cranial headboarding. That's what the modern day archaeologists insist on. But what do they base that on? They base that on, they went to school and someone told them this is what they all are. They've all been cranial deformed because the skulls were wrapped when the child was an infant. We're not disputing that happens. In fact, in the DNA film, we got Mondo Gonzalez and I, our lead archaeologist on our team. We flew up to Vancouver Island, and this woman had a skull which had been bequeathed to her from her grandfather, that had been given to him by a Native American chief. So it was like a token of welcome of the tribe, and he gave the grandfather this elongated skull, and it was passed down. So she had it. Well, once we got it, we had Rick Woodward on a Skype call on our cell phone, and Rick said cranial deformation, cranial headboard. How does he know that? I'll show you. In the back of a skull, this is the work of Rick Woodward. He's the guy that discovered this. Nobody else did, in spite of what some people will say. So Rick, we sent all the plaster cast, or the epoxy cast that Joe Taylor had done. This is a replica. It's not the real thing. And Rick Woodward got all of these skulls, there are about 4 of them, and he turned them over. And the first thing he wanted to do and look at, and it's also in the DNA film, was he wanted to see the placement of the foramen magnum right here. This is the foramen magnum. Now, the space that you see with this nice round hole, that's all done by Joe Taylor. But the original in the skull, this is the shape of the foramen magnum. First of all, the shape's all wrong. But greater than that still, the foramen magnum sits on this skull all the way to the posterior of the skull. If it's out any further, it's outside the skull. It should be sitting here. Should be sitting right here, dead center of a skull. Let me see. Yeah, there you go. Should be sitting right here. It's not. And you can deform a child's head with binding and all this other stuff, but you can't move the placement of the foramen magnum. You can't do that. In a normal human being, it's in the center of a skull, just like yours, just like mine, to balance the skull. This skull is all the way to the posterior. That is genetic. And we've got, in Omicrylonephrolum number 6, we've got, medical doctors, we've got surgeons, archaeologists, anthropologists, a chiropractor, optometrists, a whole bevy of people. They're all experts in their field. And they look at the skull and they go,
I wish it would stop
This
glaring.
is genetic. It's some sort of a genetic aberration. So all of our DNA testing that we did,
Oh,
we were the
man.
only team that really went down.
Refocus.
We took 58 samples. There was a team that came down later through Brian Forrester that took 100 samples. They got nuclear DNA, allegedly. They made a film, and it's on Gaia. I have yet to watch it. I've got a private link to it. I'll probably do it maybe tomorrow, but I need to look at it. But Brian told me what it was. So our research, the mitochondrial DNA, showed a Middle Eastern haplogroup. The haplogroup comes from the mitochondrial female side of the equation, and not all the skulls, but a preponderance of them showed a Middle Eastern or European connection. Well, that rewrites history. I mean, it does. But the academics in the scientific community didn't like our results, so they said, oh, it's all contaminated. Well, we took our protocols, Tim. I mean, they were stellar. They were right by the book. Mondo and I were dressed in head-to-toe lab suits. We had masks, goggles, hairnets, double sleeves, double gloves, boots, the whole deal. We had 40 suits. Every time we went down and we tested a skull, we would take the DNA, Chase Klotsky tagged and bagged it. Mondo and I would leave the room, take out the clothes, spray each other down with compressed air, don a new set, go back in, and then bring another skull in, and we would do the same thing. Our procedure for field work was second to none, and people have commented on that. It's at the point now where, there's not a lot of DNA labs in America. There are a bunch of them, but not a lot. If they hear Peruvian mummy or Marzulli, the door just slams shut. They will not take our stuff. And of course, the scientific community, those who looked at the evidence, immediately said, oh, well, this is all contamination. Well, if it's contaminated, why didn't we get nuclear DNA? We never got nuclear DNA. But Brian's team that came down did get nuclear DNA. And that became the basis of this show that's on Gaia. And when they looked at there's something called a gen bank. And in that is all the DNA of everything on the planet. They've taken years to create this. So if you're half porpoise, that DNA is going to show up. You're going to see DNA of a porpoise in your DNA. Of course, I'm being silly here. But when they tested the Paracas skulls, they found nuclear DNA. Unknown. Completely unknown. There's nothing in the gen bank, which it's unknown, which goes into our wheelhouse that what we are looking at, these are the remnants of the Nephilim. And I believe because it's genetic, it has nothing to do with cranial deformation. Here's something else. You can bind the head of a child all you want. You can't make the orbits 25 to 30% larger than a normal human being. You can't make the pupillary distance, instead of 65 millimeters, it's 45 millimeters. Our optometrist on our team, Dr. Jeff Duff, came on the record and stated, this has got to be genetic. Second of all, because of the orbits being 25 to 30% larger and the pupillary distance much narrower than a human being, they could see in the dark, in his estimation. We know that one of the Nephilim tribes is called the Horites, and Horites translates cave dwellers. We know that.
Wow.
And then you and I are down. This was absolutely, for me, was just mind-boggling. So the archaeologist on your team takes us way out to the reserve, middle of nowhere. Some of the most pristine beaches you'll ever see in your life, right? But it's barren. It's desolate. No rainfall at all. Probably less than a quarter of an inch a year. Welcome to Paracas.
Wow.
And he shows us the remnants of a 3,000-year-old Paracas dwelling, which is still, for the most part, intact. And then there's this chimney, which goes down, all made out of river rock. Chimney that's probably 2 foot by 2 foot. So it's not a giant. We know that. And I asked him, and I think you translated it for me. In fact, I'm positive you translated it. I said, well, did they find any vestiges of torchlight down there? He said, no. I go, well, how did they see? And he said, we don't know. We don't know how they saw. Well, going back to Dr. Jeff Duff, because of the pupillary distance and the size of the orbits, they more than likely could see in the dark. And we know that one of the tribes are the Horites, we're cave dwellers. So
yeah, they got big round eye sockets like possums have because they're nocturnal.
I'm making this stuff up.
Yeah, and as I mentioned earlier, you were down in Peru with me in 2019, and I was there working on a project, a film project, and I invited you, and Chase Kletsky was also with us. And part of it's a television series that I've been developing with Gary Haven. And part of that expedition was going into the Paracas Reserve. As you said, it's not easy to get permission to go in the Paracas Reserve. But we had an archaeologist with us named Jose Pinilla from Peru, very well-connected guy, really great guy. And so we were able to get access to the reserve, and not only access into the reserve, but we were also able to deploy our state-of-the-art GPR technology. And for those who don't know, and I'm sure nobody really knows because I haven't really, this is actually the first time, LA, that I'm talking about this stuff publicly, because we haven't even published the show yet, which you're in, and as well as Chase. But we have acquired, Gary Haven and I have acquired a ground-penetrating radar unit, 2 units, that are state-of-the-art, and what makes our units so unique, apart from the fact that they're using technology that's I'm not going to say it's secret technology, but it's tech. There's only 3 units. The last time I checked, there's only 3 units in the world, and we have one of them. And it's a deep penetrating GPR unit, and we have a shallow penetrating and a deep penetrating unit, and the deeper unit can go down it can see 300 feet below the surface of the Earth, and at high resolution. And we can get a 3-dimensional, we can get a 3-dimensional rendering through software of what we're looking at under the Earth, 300 feet down.
That's amazing.
And you saw us using that technology over there in the Paracas Reserve. And it's drone. It operates off of a drone platform. So in other words, we can fly it around, and we run it on a grid. And so we were able to deploy this technology all over the place in Peru, and we've made all kinds of astounding discoveries. But in Paracas specifically, what LA is referring to for the audience is we discovered that the Paracas people, and this is something that's well known to the archaeologists in Peru. I certainly didn't know this until Jose Pinilla told me. We discovered that the Paracas people apparently, in the middle of the desert, this is a coastal desert, as you said, but it's I don't know, LA, if I can tell you that I have never in my life been in a more barren place.
Yeah, likewise. It's like the Sahara. It's unbelievable.
It's unbelievably barren.
Yeah,
it's like the surface of Mars, but with the ocean.
Absolutely.
And you have these, they're almost like underground longhouses. That's the kind of the way I think of it, like the Viking longhouses. So you can picture a Viking longhouse, but it's built into the ground. So all you see is the roof of the longhouse, right? Like a hill sticking out of the ground, and instead of the rafters being planks of wood, what you have in Paracas is the rafters are the ribs of whales. They're whale ribs, whale rib bones. And so it's like you have the spinal cord of the whale, and then you have the rib bones, and that's their roof basically. But the house is submerged, so it's an underground dwelling.
Wow.
And I remember you and I and Chase and the rest of our team were just, especially you and I, were standing there just thinking, wait a minute, underground dwellings and big orbital sockets on the elongated skulls. You know, these people, they like to live under the ground. And that really, I know, a light bulb went off in my head, and I thought, wait a minute, there's something even more bizarre about these people than we originally thought.
You know, to see one of these guys, it's funny. It's not funny. We've got a line, once again, through Brian, there's a private museum with a full mummy, elongated skull, and the skull is massive. And I've seen it. I've been up close. I've seen this. And Brian's trying to work something out. And what I told him, I said, well, we would go down with an X-ray machine for starters and X-ray this thing to see, first of all, does it have a longer neck? So like a giraffe has the same amount of vertebrae in its neck as we do. But what happens is, and I didn't know that, thank you, Malcolm Warren, who's our chiropractor on our team. And he's there because he studies the skeletal anatomy, obviously. And so, he told me that a giraffe has exactly the same number of bones in its neck as we do. So the difference is the giraffe's cartilage is really big. So and creates a big space between the joints. Getting an X-ray machine down there, because one of our many of our medical team, because of the placement of the foramen magnum, we now believe that there was a compensatory spinal column would be longer. In other words, are we looking at Anakim, one of the Nephilim tribes, translates long necks. That's what it translates. It's not necessarily a giant. And this is what, when I got into this, I used to think that, well, all the Nephilim must be giants. Not true. Because there seems to be, this is conjecture on my part, there seems to be, when we read the biblical narrative, there are different tribes in different areas. They may have different genetic characteristics, which is why they're named cave dweller, Horites, Anakim, long necks, right? The Zamzumim, the buzzing ones. So there seems to be different genetic characteristics. In other words, the dragon is still mixing the seed, desperately trying to get something that passes as human. That's conjecture. That's what I think he's doing. He's trying to create man in his image. And, if I can hop off here just for a second, fast forward thousands of years to the present day, he's done that. There are hybrids walking amongst us, the title of Dr. Jacobs' book. There are hybrids who interact with us, and they show themselves. Al Matthews, and in our film, our free UFO film, UFO Disclosure, The Coming Great Deception, and the Luciferian Endgame. Their seed will mingle with the seed of men, but they will not cleave to them. Book of Daniel, sealed up until the end times. Seal up his book, Daniel, until men start to go to and fro with the face of the earth, and knowledge will increase. And then that book is open. Now it's open. I remember the first time Chuck Misser expounded on that sentence in Daniel. Their seed will mingle with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave to them. Well, if it's not the seed of men mingling, who's mingling? It's got to be an outside force. It's not extraterrestrials. It is the seed of the dragon, Genesis 3:15, which sets up the rest of the biblical narrative. If we don't get Genesis 3:15 right, we don't get the rest of it right. And 3:15 tells us that your seed, the seed of a dragon, your offspring, the offspring of a dragon, will be at war at enmity with the offspring of the woman. He, the proto-evangelion, Messiah, will come from the woman's seed and crush the dragon's head. That's the whole book. That's the whole book. The entire Bible is based on that one sentence, in my opinion. Everything else is a sidebar.
I agree. That's definitely the true narrative. It's the conflict. That is the conflict from chapter 1 all the way through the end of the book.
Amen. I mean, that's what it is. So, we were able to get DNA. We look at these things. In my opinion, The Paracas skulls are Nephilim, just like what happened in the Americas, except the Americas, we get the giants here. We get the 10 and 12 footers. And we know, and I know you know this, there were certain Huacaros that talk about seeing the skeleton, but this is 30 years ago, of 10 and 12 footers. We also know that in the Gold Museum in Lima, there were seated on thrones 2 skeletons, a king and a queen, and they've disappeared and no one knows what happened. Well, we all know what happened.
That's right. And if I recall, they were of unusual size. Now, they weren't like enormous, but they were like NBA basketball players.
At least.
Yeah.
And I've heard conflicting reports. I heard 10 to 12 feet. Other people said they were, 7 or 8 feet.
That's what I've heard, 7 to 8. That's what I've heard. I know they were let's put it this way. They were uncomfortably large for the curators.
Yeah, and they don't want that.
No, because the Inca, although the Inca were taller than the other native tribes, they were certainly not, like Shaquille O'Neal. So, yeah, that was an out of place artifact that they disappeared, and that's no conspiracy. It's well documented that
that's what they do. They do it over and over and over.
Yeah,
again.
especially in Peru. And in Peru, people need to understand. For those who don't know, I lived in Peru for a decade. So I'm very well acquainted with how things go in Peru. And in Peru, it's not even just let's hide things that point to the reality, the existence of giants or aliens or something else. It's let's hide anything that doesn't conform to the accepted conventional narrative of the Incan Empire, everything. And as you know, LA, having traveled in Peru, all over Peru, everything has to be Inca, and or pre-Inca in certain contexts. But all the main stuff has to be Inca. And if something is suggestive of not falling in line with that narrative, then it becomes problematic, and they tend to disappear things, even just because of that. Let alone having to deal with giants or DNA that's non-human.
There's no doubt that something, it doesn't jive with the historical record. The historical narrative is that everyone came over here. They were all, Amerindians. They all came over the Bering Strait. No one came by. There were no seafarers. No one came from Europe. Pre-Columbian never existed. End of story. The haplogroups are all B. It's Amerindians. It comes from Asia across the land bridge at the end of the Ice Age.
Yeah.
What we discovered over and over and over again. One of the skulls showed a Druze haplogroup. That's really rare. Druze is in the Middle East. It's like right around the Levant area. I mean, to get a Druze reading like that, some from the Black Sea, some from Eastern Europe, U2E1, from this one right here, the baby skull, if I can get that. So this is what we affectionately call the baby skull. This is a 1,935-year skull. Again, look at the orbits. 25.
Man, what a creepy looking skull. Imagine what the kid looked like. I wonder if they had slit eyes or pupil eyes, reptilian eyes or pupil eyes.
The 35%
Huge.
large. Yeah, look at the elongated skull. This thing's about 2 years old. Look at the massive frontal plate. Look at that. Look at this thing. And guess what? Guess where the foramen magnum is, folks? All the way in the back. You can see the little hole that we had to work with. It should be here. It should be like right in the center. It's not. It's all the way to the back. So this is not cranial deformation. It had reddish hair. And this showed, we did this 3 different labs, 2 different times, U2E1. So, and I'll tell you, I mean, I don't care anymore because they're just, UCLA, when I asked, well, we've got more samples, I got this nasty letter back from the head geneticist. But when we went down there, this guy was all into it. He was like excited by it. So we actually got a reading, and it was U2E1. Then University of Santa Cruz, which I'm not supposed to say, but I don't care, I'll say it now, they got U2E1. And then, of course, the haplogroup up in Canada, who love us, and they will do our testing. And maybe now they've got better machines who might be able to extract nuclear, who knows? Because that was years ago. And that was U2E1. So we have 3 different labs looking at this, all coming up with the same haplogroup, U2E1. It's Eastern Europe. I'm not making this stuff up. Yeah?
Now, doesn't that coincide with the results that Brian Forster was also received after conducting his DNA analysis?
Yeah, Eastern Europe, Black Sea
region. Yeah,
that whole area.
And we should say that elongated skulls obviously are not exclusive to Peru, although the Paracas elongated skulls are, I think, are the most impressive that I've ever seen, or the most bizarre, let's say.
Well, let me show you one thing here. This is from my book. This was taken out on Catalina Island. I discovered the photograph, and the way the world works, everybody steals your stuff and never gives you credit. It's just the way it works. This is a picture that I discovered out on Catalina Island years ago. There was a lost cache of records that had gone missing from this primitive archaeologist by the name of Ralph Gooden. Well, I found the 9-footer, which is right behind me. But this is, you tell me where this is. And look at the baby.
Yeah, right.
Catalina Island. They were here. And that's what people don't get. They were all over the Americas. They were here. The giants were here. In fact, I'm a shameless plug, but I'm doing a show on the PTL network on the trail of a Nephilim. And we're talking about the Ralph Gooden skeleton. That's the second show. The first show was the primer. You need to watch the first show. It'll air on the 11th on Friday night, 11 o'clock Eastern Standard, 8 o'clock Pacific. And then, of course, it airs, I think, all throughout the week. So we're really excited about this. And I'm working on show number 2, show number 3. Tim, I've got so much material. It's just ridiculous.
So it's airing this coming Friday. Your first show is airing this coming Friday on the PTL network.
PTL network, yeah.
Well, obviously, I encourage everybody to go watch that. I think that's going to be phenomenal.
On the trail of the Nephilim. Yeah, pretty cool.
Now, what do you think about? Because as I said, the elongated skulls obviously are not exclusive to Peru. You have the ones there from Catalina Island,
Sure.
and this Black Sea origin I find very intriguing. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, look, they migrated. They were everywhere. When Joshua and Caleb came into the Levant after Jericho, that's when it's everybody. The Nephilim realized that, wait a minute, this isn't fair. This just isn't Joshua and Caleb coming in, because they didn't do squat for Jericho. They just walked around the thing 7 times and blew the shofar. The walls came down. And, it's people go, that's genocide, like Richard Dawkins. And they killed everybody. That's genocidal. No, they were hybrids. We don't know what they look like, but they weren't supposed to be there. They were all contaminated. They all had Nephilim blood. That's why the mandate comes down. That's why, unless we understand the seed war, when you get to the conquest of Canaan, you go, oh my God, God's a genocidal maniac. That's what it seems like, but he's not. They're Nephilim tribes that are in the Levant. So where was I going with this?
Talking about the Black Sea.
Yeah. There's a stele. All right. There was this massive migration right after that conquest. Massive migration. They fled. They went into Sardinia, as you know, and they camped out there for quite some time. They went to Malta. They went to Gozo. They went to basically, and then up into Europe, Menga, Spain. We were there. We filmed in the largest dolmen on the frickin' planet. The thing is humongous. I've never done anything with the film. I can't get to it because I'm so backlogged with stuff. But we were there and we filmed inside. There was nobody there that day. It's a park. It's got gates all around this thing. And there was one security guard. But because the guy that we were with knows everybody, they opened up the whole place. I flew the drone. There was no one there. We had it all to ourselves. It was a God thing. There's a stele on northern Africa, which says this: we are they who fled from Joshua the robber.
Wow.
We are they who fled from Joshua the robber, the son of Nun. Mando Gonzalez told me this.
Wow.
And, I mean, that is absolutely unbelievable.
Yeah, I found that when I also came across that that inscription when I was doing research for the film, one of the True Legends films, and that was in the region of what is today, I believe, it was in what was
Nigeria.
That's right, but what was in the ancient city of Tingis, I think it was called, if I recall.
The Phoenicians, yeah.
Yeah, and it was a Phoenician settlement. It was a Phoenician settlement, and so it was in fact the Phoenicians who erected that pillar, and it was inscribed on the pillar. We are those who fled. We are those who fled from the face of Joshua the robber, the son of Nun, and that implies that the Phoenicians. Obviously, the origin of the Phoenicians was in Canaan. We know that.
Canaanites.
They're Canaanites. The Phoenicians were Canaanites. It was the Greeks who called them Phoenicians. And the Phoenicians, of course, the most famous Phoenician incident in history was Hannibal, because the Carthaginians were Phoenicians. And by the way, this kind of gets us down a little interesting path here, but it's a little bit of a digression. But the Phoenicians were a secret society. And it's my contention that you cannot truly understand or appreciate ancient history if you don't understand the Phoenicians, because the Phoenicians are everywhere. They're involved in everything all the time. Obviously, the Phoenicians show up in the Bible a lot in Tyre and Sidon,
Sure.
which are very, very important cities in the biblical narrative, and which were adversaries to Israel, but then also at times friends. It was the king of Tyre was a friend of Solomon and helped him build a temple, and that's where we get the legend of Hiram Abith and so forth. That comes from the Phoenicians. In fact, I would say that the origin of Masonry it also begins with the Phoenicians. But that's a whole other conversation. But the Phoenicians were a trade empire, and they never went very far inland because their power was in the sea. They were the masters of the sea. So there were two things that the Phoenicians excelled at. In fact, I would say there are three things that the Phoenicians excelled at. They excelled at navigating the seas. They were the great navigators of the ancient world, and they did cross the Atlantic, as you well know. They were the great navigators of the world. Indeed, they were the navy of the Egyptians in many cases. The Egyptians, all their boats and all of that came from the Phoenicians. In fact, all the cedars of Lebanon that were used in the great palaces in the ancient world, from Greece down to Egypt, were the cedars of Lebanon. They were the cedars of the Phoenicians that the Phoenicians were harvesting and building their boats. And by the way, as an aside, and I'll get back to the other two things that the Phoenicians are known for, most famously, as an aside, the Phoenicians built their boats in such a way with the cedars. They were made out of cedar planks. They built their boats in such a way that they were modular. They could disassemble their boats, carry the planks across the land, and quickly reassemble them to navigate the rivers in the interior of continents. They were mind-blowingly sophisticated when it came to seafaring and navigation. The second thing that the Phoenicians are known for is their masonry, surpassing masonry. The Phoenicians were undoubtedly the great masons of the ancient world. Who laid the megalithic foundations of Jerusalem? The Phoenicians did. It's in the Bible. The account is right there. They brought in the artisans. They brought in the stoneworkers. It was the Phoenicians who did it. And I would argue that when we see megalithic constructions in a post-flood context, especially on the island of Sardinia, I attribute it to the Phoenicians. I think they're the only ones who retained the knowledge to build megaliths in a post-flood context, albeit to a much lesser degree. They were still inferior to those who had preceded them in the pre-flood world, but they somehow were able to keep some of that knowledge, to safeguard some of that knowledge. And then, of course, the third thing that the Phoenicians are known for is they excelled in writing. we get our alphabet from the Phoenicians. That's why we call it phonetics. It comes from the Phoenicians. And so combine those three things together. These guys are the greatest seafarers of the ancient world. They're the greatest masons, and they're the writers. They're the record keepers and the writers and the masters of language.
Yeah, and that sounds cool. You just heard an owl screech.
When you combine those three things together, that is a remarkable civilization that is weaving its way through some of the most important stories in antiquity, as I said, including the Carthaginian wars with Hannibal and the Romans, and then also you talk about the Nephilim, the diaspora of the Nephilim all over the earth. How did they get to America? So how do you have giants in the land of Canaan that are fleeing from the face of Joshua, the son of Nun? How are they ending up in North America? Because as you well know, and by the way, LA's done great work on this, and I commend everybody to LA's work on this, the mound builders in America. Without question, there were the bones of giants were discovered in the mounds of America. Even Abraham Lincoln references
Talks about it, right?
I mean, there were giant bones in the mounds of America, full stop, end of story. There is a mountain of evidence that there were giant bones discovered in America, including what LA has on the wall there behind him from the Catalina Islands. So how did those giants get here? I contend that they came through the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians had a cult of giant worship.
There's a stone, and this is in our On the Trail of the Nephilim episodes 4 and 5. We spent a lot of time in America's Stonehenge. We were there with Fritz Zimmerman. Dennis Stone is the curator, the owner of the property. So on my first foray there, Fritz was not with me. So it's just, I'm following Dennis's son, Kelsey, and I've got one of those little Osmo things. And we're just going through the museum, B-roll. That's with B-roll, right? And he's showing me, obviously, the arrowheads, but these are the 28-pound axe heads that shouldn't be there, but they are. This is the 28-day column that was, and he's just, walking me through the museum. And so I'm filming him. It's all B-roll. And then he gets to this one case. And I go, well, what's this? Well, these are the stones that had writing on them. Oh, really? Well, what's this one say? And he goes, well, and where was it found? He goes, well, this was found in a collapsed chamber under about a foot of soil. And we uncovered it and we realized it was writing, but we had no idea what it was looking at. Okay? So it lay in the museum for 11 years. And then enter Professor Barry Fell from Harvard University, who looked at the stone and said, I think I can translate it. That looks like Iberian Punic. And so I said, well, Kelsey, what does it say? And Kelsey goes, it says this: to Baal of the Canaanites in dedication. And in the film, when I left it, you hear this long pause, and I'm just like, I can't even believe what I just heard. And I go, what did you just say? And Kelsey kind of laughs nervously. To Baal of the Canaanites in dedication. And we kept on filming. When we were done, I said, you have no idea what you just did. And we took the stone out of the case, laid it on the table, and there was a roundtable discussion. And I educated them in all things Nephilim. And what this is, the Nephilim are here. Absolutely.
And the Iberian Punic, that is Carthaginian territory. That's why the Romans called it the Punic Wars. That's what they called that's how they referred to the Phoenicians. So that's why today we refer to that as the Punic Wars. So that's Phoenician.
Yeah, all day long.
Yeah, and so
that's a 4,000-year-old site. That's a 4,000-year-old site with a huge sacrificial table on it.
And if you sail due west from Canaan, you go through the Eastern Mediterranean, through the Western Mediterranean, through the Straits of Gibraltar, straight across, beeline straight across from the Straits of Gibraltar, you end up in America. You end up in the bay. What's that bay called up there? That once connected to the Great Lakes. I forget the name of that
Okay, they say the Nephilim fled from Israel to America, but how did they get there? Did they build big ships, or was it like just big rafts, or what? Because if they built big ships, you'd think there'd be wreckages of it.
Bay up there on the map up in Canada. But the Phoenicians, just due west from the Straits of Gibraltar, you are in North America and you're in let's say the Great Lakes system. That's where you end up. So the Phoenicians could have sailed straight over the Atlantic, which they did.
What
No
they
question. I mean, the
sailing?
Phoenicians, it's a matter of history that the Phoenicians circumvented Africa. They circumvented Africa. I mean, these guys were said there was pretty much maybe outside of Antarctica, there was pretty much nowhere that they couldn't get to. The Phoenicians were up in Scotland. The Phoenicians,
and 4,000 years ago, they may have gone to Antarctica.
That's very possible. That's
Because
very, and
that's map where it shows
exactly.
Coastal. How does that work?
Was it the Phoenicians responsible for some of those old maps? It's very possible. But in my mind, there's no question that the Phoenicians came to North America, and they came through. They came through the Great Lakes system, and remember, they could disassemble their boats. They were modular. They could like Legos, right? They could disassemble their boats and reassemble them on land, and then navigate the rivers. They were in the Great Lakes, and they were mining copper in the Great Lakes
all day long.
In fact, the copper in the Michigan copper has a trademark purity. It's got a trademark purity. And I forget what it is, 99 point something, right? But it's trademark. In other words, when you find a purity of that degree in copper, it likely came from the Michigan copper mines.
You know where it came from, sure.
Well, guess where they found that? Well, guess where they found that copper? Sardinia.
There you go.
Sardinia.
Surprise.
And as you know, LA, because you were in Sardinia as well, Sardinia was a hub of the Canaanites and the Phoenicians.
Yeah.
In a way that, I mean, I think it was, as I say in the film that I made about it, I think it was ground zero for the Canaanites. I think that that was their fallback position when they were driven out of Canaan. They went to Sardinia and they fortified Sardinia.
Big time.
And Sardinia is kind of a whole nother topic, but you know, on Sardinia, you have to this day, you have these megalithic sepulchres that are called the tombs of the giants, and have been called the tombs of the giants since time immemorial. And if you go online and you type in tombs of giant Sardinia, you're going to find some armchair archaeologists who say giants couldn't even fit into those tombs. It's, you know, it has nothing to do with giants. It's just folklore. Well, that's ridiculous. As you well know, you could easily fit a body of a giant, even in the smallest of the tombs of the giants on the island of Sardinia. I know because I laid down in them.
Exactly.
And you could easily fit an 8 to 12 to 15 foot guy in even the smallest of the tombs of the giants.
It's just like Gilgal Raphaim and the Tomb of the Giants on Sardinia. But what I found interesting about the Tomb of the Giants in Sardinia was there was a comparison between what I saw there, because of this little niche off to the side in the tomb where someone would lay down. The giant is probably still there, intact, in situ, probably 10 feet down, 12 feet down, underneath that. And in America's Stonehenge, the oracle chamber, it's almost exactly the same. When you walk into the oracle chamber, there to your left is a little place, a little alcove, where an initiate could come in and they would basically transfer the energy from that giant, the spirit of that giant, that Nephilim giant, into the acolyte, into the neophyte. One more thing. Thor Heyerdahl proved that you could go from North Africa straight to Gibraltar, essentially, like you were saying.
Mm-hmm.
No map, no nothing. Have a sail, and the trade winds would blow you to the island of Barbados without even knowing anything about anything. The trade wind will just blow you to Barbados. But the Phoenicians were expert sailors. They knew longitude,
that's right,
and latitude, and you're right. They were all over the East Coast, America, Stonehenge, inland in New Hampshire, and they were there 4,000 years ago.
And the area of the United States that I was referencing earlier, if you sail through the Straits of Gibraltar and you sail due west, you will end up in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, which is the access way.
That's it.
That's the access way to the Great Lakes.
Yeah.
And again, one of the contentions that people would have is, yeah, but how do they get past Niagara Falls? How do they get past these impediments? They disassembled their boats and they put them back together in the river. I mean, this is what the Phoenicians were famous
There you go. He just answered my question.
for. And a point I wanted to make about Sardinia, I had never heard you say that about what you discovered in terms of the acolyte in that site here in America Stonehenge, that it corresponds perfectly.
They're almost identical.
It corresponds perfectly to what I discovered in Sardinia, because in Sardinia, in the tombs of the giants, you have usually you have like a large face stone. And by the way, those tombs, and for those who don't know, and I'll probably throw an image up here as we're talking about it, but the tombs are they're in the shape of a bullhead.
Right.
And some people say it's a boat, it looks like a boat, but I think it's a bullhead. They're in the shape of a bullhead.
Yeah, so that's a bullhead.
With the horns and the face of a bull. And they're megalithic stones. And the stones are cyclopean. In other words, there's no mortar. They're just large stones that are configured without the use of mortar in the shape of a bullhead. And some of the stones are very large. But what a lot of people don't realize is that they were covered with a mound. They were covered with earth. So in the ancient times, you would not see the megalithic stones. You would see a mound. You would see an earthen mound covering the stones. And all you would see is that curved entrance. So the bullhorn sort of curved towards you. And in the middle of that curve is a face stone that's sort of blocking the entrance to the tomb. But in the stone, at the bottom, near the bottom of the stone, is an opening. There's an opening, a little doorway in the front of the stone. And it's suggested by archaeologists that doorway is so that the soul of the people buried could escape or whatever, blah, blah, blah. No, in fact, that doorway is related to a Phoenician rite. It's called the rite of incubation.
There you go.
And so the doorway is small so that only a child could go through it, or an adolescent. So an adolescent or a child, when they came of age, who knows, probably in those times, maybe 14 years old, who knows, 13, 14 years old, I don't know what it was back in those times. When they came of age, they would crawl into the tomb through the small doorway, and they would literally incubate in the tomb for who knows how long. And the design of the tomb was exactly what you just said, was so that they could commune.
Right.
They could commune with the hero buried beneath.
Exactly.
Wow.
And if you familiarize yourself with the mythology and the legends in Sardinia, that hero who was buried beneath happened to be a giant. And that's why the tombs are called the tombs of the giants. So that corridor that's in the middle of the tomb, that chamber, it's not supposed to house a dead body.
Right.
It's supposed to be a chamber into which these young people would go for the incubation rite. And they would sit in there. And that's why in the tombs of the giants in Sardinia, you see a little area where that's sort of a little niche where you can sit on a bench and maybe put a candle there. And the whole idea was to absorb the power, the prowess of the Gibborim buried beneath, of the mighty one buried beneath, and to commune with the heroes of old. And that was the point of the tombs. And it's amazing to me that if you go to Sardinia, the natives in Sardinia, they know this. They know this legend, this tradition. But if you talk to some of the archaeologists, there was to this day they will tell you that, oh no, the chambers inside of the tombs were large because it was familial burials, right? So you would get a whole family buried inside, and the little doorway was for the spirits to escape up into the cosmos or whatever.
What drives me nuts about these guys, they just make it up as they go along. They really do. They just make it up.
Because they don't consult with the tradition of the people.
They never do. They never ask the Native Americans here or the people on Sardinia. Well, they're just peasants. They don't know.
Exactly. And by the way, the people in Sardinia, they did a genetic test some years ago. It wasn't that long ago. They tested the genetics of these Sardinian people, and do you know what they came up with?
Yeah, Middle
What?
East.
Phoenician.
No way.
They are Phoenician.
No
and guess what you
way.
see on Sardinia? A whole lot of red hair. In fact, our mutual friend Paula, who's a tour guide in Sardinia, has red hair, and she will tell you that I'm Phoenician. The Sardinians are Phoenician, and these rites and the tunes and everything, it's all related to Phoenician rites. And of course, they have the Nuraghi civilization.
Yeah, that's a whole different number. Yeah.
That's famous on the island. But the Nuraghi civilization, a lot of the locals believe that the Nuraghi civilization was an offshoot of the Phoenician civilization.
I would concur with that. That's what I think too.
Which is itself an offshoot of the Canaanites.
I've got another interview coming up in 1 minute, so.
Well, this was great, LA, and
I know we can talk all day.
We're gonna have to jump back on again before long, and we've got a whole lot more to talk about. But we'll shut it down right here.
All right.
Hey, thanks for coming on, and everybody go buy LA's books, go get his films, go over to his website. His stuff is awesome.
Thanks, Timmy. We'll see you soon. Have a great vacation.
Thanks, LA.
Bye.
That was interesting. History. Hang on. There it is.
We've helped travelers see the world for over a decade. This year, wherever adventure takes you.
We're going to go back, way back, over 100 years ago to 1911, Lake Delavan, Wisconsin. I had been to the site. This is what the old hotel used to look like. Doesn't look like that anymore. But something happened there, and we'll get into that and so much more. I think you'll find this really interesting because, as usual, there seems to be a cover-up. Is this nothing more than a conspiracy theory, or is it actually based on fact? I'll show you the fact because I spent 3 days in the archives, and I found some very interesting letters, and I'll get into that and so much more. But first, a word from our trusted sponsor, Noble Gold. And before we get to the commercial, I just want you to know something, folks. I've invested with Noble Gold because I just think that we're in a period of time where everything is very unstable. So I bought some gold. My wife and I discussed it, and we took some of a chunk of money and just invested it in Noble Gold. And so I'm not telling you to do anything that we haven't done ourselves. Also,
yeah, LA Marzulli is very interesting, isn't he, Hank?
I have collagen every day, and I think it's making a difference. Anyway, we'll see you on the other side of the commercial. All right, folks, is investing in silver today a good idea? Colin Plume from our friends at Noble Gold thinks so. We had Colin on the show last month, and the reason why I did this, they're a trusted sponsor, but I've invested my money with Noble Gold. A good portion of the cash that we had on hand, we converted into precious metals, and I'm not telling you to do anything that I'm not doing myself. Okay, so on the national desk, Colin explains there has been a huge sell-off of silver because of its low price right now. Silver is the most useful industrial metal out there, and demand is soaring for electronics and electronic cars, solar panel circuits, as the green agenda begins to speed up. As industries pick up after the pandemic supply chain issues, the trend down should reverse quickly, and silver may rocket. Now that's, he doesn't have a crystal ball, nor do I, but it certainly could go up. Folks, don't miss this. Give the team at Noble Gold a call and join thousands of others, including myself, who've taken advantage of this blip in the market. They'll guide you through the process and make it easy for you. And this month, you'll get a stunning free 3-ounce silver American Virtue coin with a qualified IRA of $20,000 or higher. Folks, you can't go wrong with Noble Gold, and that's why we put our money in with Noble Gold. I believe it may be the safest place to put your cash right now. Call the team, 877-646-5600, 5347, 877-646-5347, or visit noblegoldinvestments.com, noblegoldinvestments.com. Folks, tell them L.A. Marzulli sent you. So this is Lake Lawn Hotel, Lake Delavan. I was actually there. I stayed in the hotel several days. Very interesting place. It sort of sprawls out along the lake. Of course, this is what it looked like circa 1911, right at the turn of the last century. This is what it looks like now. It's a beautiful place, idyllic place, but there are mounds on the property. There were mounds in 1911, and the Phillips brothers, who were in charge of the hotel, did some archaeological work there. We'll get into that in just a second. So this is the former curator. Whether he's there or not, I don't know. This is a mound directly in front of the hotel, which, according to him, had never been excavated. We don't know that for a fact, but we do know that other mounds were excavated. Gives you an idea of some of the artifacts. Now, these are all Native American artifacts. I mean, there's certainly nothing anomalous about them. You can see $1 bills about that long. These are normal axe heads that a 5'6" Native American could certainly wield with ease. However, and this is what I found in the archives. And folks, you got to understand something. You can spend days in the archives and never turn up a thing, which is why when I went to Catalina Island, and of course I'm going to go down a slight rabbit trail here, I was able to look at all the museum boxes. I think there were like maybe 5 or 6 museum boxes showing and archiving all the Ralph Glidden records. Glidden was a primitive archaeologist employed by the Hay Museum. Hay was later gobbled up by the Smithsonian. This is circa 1919 and 1921. So there's a lot of hit pieces done on Mr. Glidden. He's a little more than a grave robber, blah, 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 blah. But remember, archaeology, even then, was sort of still in its infancy. It's not like the exact science that we have today. A lot of speculation even today among archaeologists. Well, who did this? How did this happen? And because there's an anti-supernatural bias in both the scientific community, archaeological circles, academia, they never go to the supernatural. Well, welcome to my world, because of the belief in the biblical prophetic narrative, in what we see in our Bibles, the guidebook of the supernatural. These sites, in my opinion, and the large skeletons that were taken out of them, are Nephilim sites. Nephilim sites. So Glidden and the archives, I spent 2 days, about 9 hours in the archives, 5 hours one night and 4 hours the next morning before the museum opened. And I found a treasure trove of photographs and artifacts. That's all in the book right here on the trail of the Nephilim. So now this is, I'm going to have to go slowly here because it's written longhand. And this is, you can see up on top, Lake Lawn Hotel. Okay, there it is. And it's 1911. You can see it right there. April 6, 1911. So what this is about, the Phillips brothers are writing to Mr. Brown in Madison. Brown was sort of the head archaeologist. And I think more of my records were destroyed in the fire, so I don't think I have the photographs of them. This letter goes on for like 3 or 4 pages. I only have the first 2 in my photo archives. Whether or not the SD cards survived the fire, I've got probably 70 or 80 SD cards that I'm going through and cataloging for my own library because I need to do that. I may still have it, I don't know. But I know that the Canon camera that shot all this was completely destroyed in the fire. And also some SD cards were destroyed in our 2018 fire. But I digress. So what we see here is April 6th, and you can see it's older stationery. It says 1910. Well, he's written 1 over the 0. So it's 1911. And this is to Charles Brown, Madison, Wisconsin, dear sir. Pardon delay in answering your recent farm find and closed questions. I think that's what it says. Recent find and closed questions answered. Will say have done nothing in mound since not even field trench as its own, it's hard to say, as its own to further investigation. So they haven't done anything with the trench. I enclose also sketch of sandstone that may possibly be a spirit stone. It is better than sketch and stands square and solid on its face. It's a freak of nature. No handwork. I intend to have this with some of the skulls and bones placed around the same and do some photographs. The write-ups you have probably seen in various papers are not ours. We are trying to keep everything quiet, but they butted in. The news media butted in everywhere, and we just filled in a little dirt in the pit, started another trench. Okay, the letter continues, and I remember what it says. And there's actually a sketch. And doggone, I'm going to see if I can find that, but I think it was burned in the fire. What was interesting, these are photocopies of the handwritten letters found in Madison, Wisconsin, in the archives. So, and I said, I want to see the letters from the Phillips brothers. So this discourse goes from the Phillips brothers back to Mr. Brown, who's the head archaeologist in Madison. And the Phillips brothers are stating on the record that these are not normal skeletons. They are not a disarticulated bone pile. And by the way, they were found in an upright, seated position with their knees tucked up into their chest. They had elongated skulls. They were very large. The Phillips brothers estimated them at around between 7 and 9 feet. They were all facing east. This is the remnants of the giants. And the reason why you don't talk about this, because in archaeological circles, there are no giants. Well, Native Americans, and you've heard me talk about this ad nauseum, Native Americans have records of 6-fingered, red-haired, cannibalistic giants that roamed the Americas. Other authors have delved into this, no pun intended with Lake Delavan. But the bottom line is it goes on, and he actually draws what the skeletons look like. And he's insisting to Brown that these are not Native Americans, they are something else. So it's incredibly interesting. This is from Linda Godfrey's blog, right off the net. And it's sort of an older post from 2014. And this is how she starts it. It's like 8 pages, and I'm just going to skip through it. The box ad lay between a charity's plea for donated boats and cars and an announcement of an open house for a senior apartment village. This is the ad I placed in the local paper. Giant skeletons found at Lake Lawn, it declared. Right there on page 9, May 4th, 2014. Walworth County, Sunday, Lake Lawn Hotel, 1911. The ad continued. In 1911, the Phillips brothers uncovered skeleton that ranged from 7 to 9 feet. Author Elia Marzulli is offering a $500 reward for photographs of the dig site showing the skeletons at Lake Lawn. We had no takers, which is really a bummer. In fact, that's really not true. We had one woman who emailed us, and apparently she had photographs, but she would not share them.
Why email?
Is that? I actually doubled the offer and offered $1,000, but let me continue. The mention of ancient giant skeletons on my local paper stopped me cold. I knew that a number of such remains had long ago been disinterred from one or more of 100+ ancient conical and effigy mounds built along the shores of Delavan Lake, Wisconsin. This was before the structures were protected by law as sacred and historic treasures. Now known as the Lake Lawn Lodge and Golf Course, the popular resort is only about a 15-minute drive from my house. She's been there many times. So let me continue. The ground still contained many of the original mounds at the time. Let's go back here, right there. That's one of the original mounds. Okay, were leveled by early settlers. The mounds were leveled in order to create farming and houses. And so from 1850 until almost the turn of that century in Lake Delavan, winter quarters for members of the Mabby's Circus or Maybe's Circus and Menagerie, complete with a ring barn for training horses. So this is where Anna Mabby Phillips and her second husband, Ernest Field Phillips, built the original Lake Lawn Hotel. This is where the Phillips brothers get tied in. They build the hotel. They're antiquarians. They're curious about the mounds. They begin archaeological digs in the mound. So they chose a 40-foot diameter mound behind the hotel's barn. The Phillips brothers did this, and soon uncovered a burial chamber 6 feet below the top of the 3-foot high mound. The chamber measured about 7 by 9 feet, and its floor was made of carefully layered gravel, white sand, and blue clay. The blue clay we've heard about over and over and over again. In the Smithsonian's own records, they talk about exhuming 7, 8, 9, 10 footers. It's in the Smithsonian's own records. Mondo Gonzalez we actually did an interview with Mondo several years ago, I think circa 2019. Mondo came in here in Oklahoma, and we actually interviewed him about all of this. And he was quoting from the Smithsonian's own records. So we know that it was there in the Smith's own records. So, and we know about the blue clay. The blue clay creates this watertight environment which preserves these skeletons. There was a mound that Mondo and I dug into, and we found lots of blue clay.
No
We stopped
way.
digging for some reason. Now, we might go back to that mound. It's in Ohio. It's on private property. We have permission from the owner to dig there, but, you know, resources and time and everything else. So we've already dug into that. We found nothing. However, when we hit the layer of blue clay, we stop. And usually the blue clay is right at surface level, and that's where we found it, number one. Number two, it's there to protect what's underneath. It creates a watertight barrier, just like we see at Lake Delavan. The chamber measured about 7 by 9 feet, and the floor was made of carefully layered gravel, white sand, and blue clay. There was evidence that the top of the chamber had been constructed of a 1 foot layer of dirt topped with fire clay. Okay, so now to the excitement of the Phillips brothers, the mound did indeed contain burials, 14 of them, including several with fractured or otherwise damaged skulls that indicated a violent death. Where have I seen this before? I go down to Peru with Brian Forrester and Senior Juan, who's no longer with us, and one of the Wacaros who took us to this ancient burial ground in Peru. It was on top of a high place, and it was ceremonial. There was nothing good about the site. It was a killing site. It was a killing field. At least 60 people were clubbed to death. How do we know? Because on the skulls, right, on the left side of the skull, right here, there was either a crack, a hole, it was fractured. So somebody who had a club in their right hand just went wham and blew their skull out and killed them. So that's what we see.
Wow.
And we see the same thing up in here. Otherwise damaged skulls that indicated a violent death. Most of the bodies had been interred lying on their backs with their knees flexed and arms bent upwards, but 2 were buried in a sitting position. The only artifacts found, these were on the top of the mound mopper chamber, were a piece of flint and an 8-inch sandstone pebble, a 6-inch redstone. Ernie Phillips submitted a full report of the finding to the Wisconsin Archaeological Society. Okay, so this is where it really gets interesting. Madison, Wisconsin news article, strange skeletons found. The article ventured to state that the skeletons indicated a hereto unknown race of men once inhabited southern Wisconsin. So, and it continues from there. The heads, presumably, of these skeletons are much larger than the heads of any race which inhabit America today. From directly over the eye sockets, the head slopes straight back, and the nasal bones protrude far above the cheekbone. So the question is this cranial deformation, or is this something genetic? We don't have the skulls. There are no pictures of the skulls. All of this has been lost, so we can't even investigate them. That's why Peru is so incredible, because in all these little private museums, we can look at the elongated skulls, and we know from our DNA evidence and also our multidisciplined study of the elongated skulls in Peru that it is genetic. Check out number 6, DNA, in our On the Trail of a Nephilim series.
Check the
So let's
DNA of these
continue. The
elongated
jawbones are
skulls
long and pointed,
and the
bearing a
DNA
minute resemblance to the head of the monkey. The teeth in the front of the jaw are regular molars. They were also found in the mounds, the skeletons, presumably of women, which had smaller heads but were similar in facial characteristics. The skeletons, this is from the Devlin Republic. The skeletons appear to be those of warriors of powerful frame and immense size when compared.
And I forgot cats do that, male cats, sprayed at the furniture and that, because I get my cats neutered pretty young as well.
To people of this day and age. The Delavan Enterprise noted that the cranium of one of the ancient warriors was of unusual size, and the other bones found would indicate they were a race of giants. So this is what we get from mainstream archaeology. Oh, they're just trying to sell papers, are they? Why would the Phillips brothers continue writing to Charlie Brown over to the head archaeologist in Madison, insisting that these skeletons were not normal? They were, in fact, giants. We know this, that at least one of the skeletons was kept and shellacked and kept in the basement of the Phillips brothers' house. When he died, everything went to auction. And I spent 3 days in the local historian's archives. The guy had passed away. There were 42 boxes of material. I had a team of volunteers, and we went through everything. We spent 3 days, turned up absolutely nothing. And that's what sometimes that happens, more so than not, because all the stuff has been sanitized. We don't know what happened to the skeleton that was in Phillips' basement. And did one of the museums come and snatch it and take it away? More than likely. I would say, and I actually called the University of Wisconsin, which allegedly took some of the artifacts. I spoke to the curator. He had no idea of what had happened. And it's just like the Raiders of the Lost Ark movie in the first film, when the Ark of the Covenant is crated up, and then you see this huge warehouse, and some guy with a dolly or whatever is carting that thing, and he makes a left turn, and he disappears. It's exactly what happens. We know that this is the truth, that large skeletons were exhumed all across the Americas. Folks, we are looking for a mound only in Ohio. Why? Because in Ohio, we can dig legally if it's on private property. If we find, and we don't want to take any artifacts, we don't want to remove the burial, we just want to uncover, photograph, measure, and bring the scientific community in to examine it. That's all we want to do. We're not interested in grave robbing or taking artifacts. What we are interested in is proving that there was a race of giants that were here. And all of this has been deliberately obfuscated from the peoples of the world. So, folks, UFO disclosure film, we're going to get it. We're going to get them probably early next week. You're going to want to check this out. We've got specials and sales. Think about this. We offered the first 2 films for free. Now it's your turn to help you, because we're working on number 4, which is on the
See, that's so different to Paul Begley, isn't it, guys?
We are on fire with this series. Number 3, Close Encounters, has some riveting, just incredible testimonies from people that have seen not just lights in the sky, but like craft in their backyard, craft just materializing from out of nowhere, people being levitated, entities in the room. It's all in this film. I think you'll find it extremely interesting. Please go, la@marzulli.net. Order now. You'll save $5. And you'll be helping support what we do right here on our On the Trail of a Nephilim series, our UFO update, and of course, supernatural confrontations. Anyway, folks, thanks so much for watching On the Trail of. I'm L.A. Marzulli, the director and producer of this film, UFO Disclosure, The Coming Great Deception, the Luciferian Game. I shot the footage in 2016, and we edited it and released the film in 2017. In December of that year, 2017, on Tucker Carlson's show, he had a guest on, Commander David Fravor, who was a former F-18 fighter pilot. Fravor had an encounter over the Pacific Ocean with a tic-tac-shaped UFO. Tucker asked Commander David Fravor, in your own words, what do you think this was? Fravor looked right at the camera and said, whatever this was not of this earth. One. That's a groundbreaking statement. You've never heard anything like that before, especially on the mainstream media, as it were. Since then, our government has stated on the record that UFOs or UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena, are real. Folks, what are we to make of this? The reason I circled back and re-edited this film is I believe that disclosure is now being rolled out. We see it month after month after month. The purpose of this film is to arm you with what I believe is the truth, that these are not extraterrestrials from some other galaxy. They are, in fact, interdimensional entities that are messengers of deception. As you know, this film is for free. All I would ask is that you pass it forward. Share it with your loved ones, family members, your pastor. We are told, we are warned, in ancient prophetic text, that men would faint from fear from what is coming upon the earth, that the dragon would come with all signs and lying wonders, that even the elect would be deceived if that were possible. What are we to make of those statements? They are dire warnings from thousands of years ago. I truly believe we are in a window of time that is unprecedented, unlike any other time in history. We are being told by our government that the UFO or UAP, unidentified aerial phenomenon, is actually real, that we have in our possession off-world vehicles. In my opinion, when they really show up, when there's full disclosure, everything will change. However, these are not extraterrestrials from some faraway galaxy. They are, in my opinion, interdimensional entities that have a nefarious agenda. They are messengers of deception and masters of deceit. They lie and do so habitually. And I would ask you, who is the father of lies? In this film, you will see what I believe is incontrovertible evidence that the phenomenon is not only real, but it has a very dark side, a very nefarious agenda, which is why we call it the coming great deception and Luciferian endgame.
My name is Alan Matthews. I've seen a UFO.
I've seen a UFO.
And I saw a UFO.
A UFO.
And so we all went up to the window and we could see this giant UFO
and saw 3 or 4 orbs that were up in the sky doing circles in erratic movements up and down in circular motion.
And all of a sudden we see this light in the sky, and I asked my husband, is that a plane? And he said, I don't think so. And so we kept watching it, and it hovered over the treetops, and you could see the flashing lights around it. It was round. See the flashing lights around.
Guys, I think we watched this before, and it's just all on UFOs, people's vision of seeing UFOs. So I might give that a miss. And this one.
Big, small, shop it all interest free with a Latitude Go MasterCard credit card. The card made for shopping.
Sixth car and truck rental has arrived. So get 15% off small cars, big cars, electric cars, and cars as big as trucks, because they are trucks. So book now with Sixt.
This is part 2 of our ongoing UFO series. UFOs are real, burgeoning, and not going away. The first film is right here on YouTube, and it's for free. You can check that out. The second film, which you're about to see, is also free on YouTube. All I would ask is that you pass it forward. Folks, it's coming down so fast that it's hard for me to keep up with it, seriously.
This is May this year.
6th rung of the disclosure ladder, and I'll get into that a little bit later in the film. You'll see that. First off, we interview Francisco Carrera. Francisco was our guide in Portugal, and then, of course, later on when we toured all through Europe, looking and filming at megalithic sites. Francisco is head of exopolitics in Portugal. What he brings to the table in this one-on-one interview, which happened a couple of years ago, is again so few people gain unless they're immersed in the phenomena, and Francisco is such a person. Our second mainstay in the film is Preston Dennett. Preston Dennett is an author, researcher, perhaps best known for his work, UFOs over Topanga Canyon. Groundbreaking material. Topanga Canyon is about a half an hour from where I'm sitting right now. There was an unbelievable flap right over Topanga Canyon. I remember one story where the entire car was lifted off the ground. We've heard all this before. Folks, UFOs are real, versioning not going away. This is the coming great deception. This is part 2. All I would ask, once again, is that you pass it forward. In 1947, we go to the Roswell crash, which allegedly happened. And it's funny how the military has written about every 10 years they write, Roswell case closed. The weather balloon crash test dummies, and they constantly are kind of reworking their script because they know it's bogus. I think they know it's bogus. But, Stanton Friedman brought that to light as well as others. I remember sitting down with Dr. Jesse Marcel Jr., who was a small boy around 11 or 12 at the time when all this happened. And he told me his father came in with a box of parts, wreckage, debris, and set it on the kitchen table and woke up his mother and himself, Jesse Marcel Jr., took them down, showed them this and said, what you're seeing you may never see again. This is from a craft from another world. He never backed off his story till his death. The Marcels were ridiculed. When I sat down with Jesse Marcel Jr., we had it was a one-on-one interview, but then I wrote a series of questions which he replied to, by computer, and that serves as the basis for the interview. So, Roswell has been, to some people, like the Holy Grail. To others, it was a weather balloon. What say you?
Well, weather balloon, that's nonsense. It was the 509 cavalry. They were highly trained officers. They had a high clearance. They dealt with the expense of the H-bomb, the atomic bomb. They were the ones that deployed the tests for the atomic bomb. So, and they would send weather balloons every day, almost every day. So they knew
what a weather balloon looks like.
Exactly. The crash test dummies, also Stanton Friedman talked about it in the sense that they only were invented or put into practice in '53. So 47 is still a long way.
Unless they had a time machine.
Exactly.
A crash test dummies are not going to work.
So like any idea, any rebuke, it's nonsense. And why would high patent military generals would be so worried about what happened?
I mean, if it was a weather balloon, why keep writing a new book every 5 or 10 years or something?
Exactly, but why bother high-ranking generals to just call it's a weather balloon? Okay, there would be teams that would deal with it, and that's it. Having all those people worry about it,
it doesn't make any sense. No, this woman came up to us at a conference and told us that her father was ex-Navy SEAL. In fact, was one of the early SEAL teams. Whatever, and it's the type of a story which you can't vet. Obviously, he will come on the record because of clearances and all this other stuff. But apparently, he told her the story. They had just got back from a mission, and they were dispatched to an area in the Four Corners region where the crash disc was. And when they got there, they were led to the disc. They peered into it. They were dead alien bodies within the craft, and then they set up a perimeter, and the retrieval came in, and all this stuff. So Jackie Gleason makes a statement that he actually viewed dead aliens. The statement is 55 years ago, something like that. So it's in maybe the mid 60s, whatever. The bottom line is that.
Yeah, Diane, I get my cats fixed like within the first week. I get them, so there's no mistakes.
Is he lying or telling the truth? With everything that we know, I believe that Gleason's statement is absolutely 100% factual. How do I know this? Gleason and Nixon were pals. And I believe that Nixon showed Gleason what was really going on because Gleason had an interest in UFOs. He saw them. So, look, folks, a statement like this that happens decades ago, and now our government is telling us that they have in their possession off-world vehicles.
It's not us, it's them.
So the bottom line is this. Our government has deliberately obfuscated the truth for decades and decades, for year after year after year, with bogus books like Roswell, case closed. They just make stuff up. Roswell will never be closed until they actually pony up and show us the actual crash wreckage from the Roswell site.
Guys, I don't know what's going on with this video. Every like 2 minutes there's a click, 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 click. It's not me, it's these guys.
And the video that they took. We know that all that exists. And maybe that's another rung on the disclosure ladder. I'm going to jump forward, because all this is in the past. I'm going to jump forward to what Luis Elizondo said on Tucker Carlson just a short while back. And Tucker asked, and to me it was a staged question. It was set up because, you know, Elizondo thinks it's like, well, I can't do that. Nonsense. Of course you can do it. That's why you're there. I think he's one of the guys that is sort of bringing about disclosure to the people at large. But Tucker Carlson asked Luis Elizondo, does the United States government have debris from crashed UFOs? And Elizondo replies, yes, absolutely.
Quickly sum it up for us. Why do you think this material might be connected to UFOs?
Well, without getting into a lot of detail right now, because it's frankly, it's too speculative for me at this point to say why I think something. At the end of the day, it's going to be what the analysis tells us. And if you have, for example, interesting isotopic ratios that are not normally found, let's say, on this planet, then you have to scratch your head and either A, it's been engineered that way, or B, it came from somewhere else. And ultimately, that's what we're trying to find out.
So these are materials brought to you by people who say this is at the site of a UFO incident or a crash?
In some cases, yes. Again, unfortunately, I can't elaborate too much with some of these individuals. We do have non-disclosure agreements, but it's from various sources, both private and governmental.
It goes without saying, I hope that you'll come back as you get to the bottom of this. We remain skeptical but open-minded on this and all things. Luis, great to see you. Thank you so much.
That's what it said, off-world vehicles. And that ties into Bob Lazar, which goes way back to Area 51 in the 90s, and he was scoffed at and laughed at. I remember showing the video to my family. Well, that's interesting, but you know, we have really no proof. And yet now it's off-world vehicles in their possession. Bob Lazar, Area 51, the sports model. What do you think?
Yeah, I've always supported Bob Lazar.
I have too.
Because he's not the only guy. Yeah, he was the front man, sort of. I talked to George Knapp, who really did the research with Lazar, and very sincere.
Very much so, and very truthful. I mean, they're not, you can tell by their, and you know, you've done enough interviews, their body language, where they look at you in the eye, the whole thing, that they're, whatever they're saying, they believe is true.
Yeah, and there were so many other whistleblowers saying the same exact thing. Talk to experiencers, people who have been inside these craft. Right. And one guy I remember distinctly, who had a bunch of experiences in his home in Utah, said what he saw was exactly what Bob Lazar described. Wow. And that's how he knew Bob Lazar was real, because the craft that he was taking on board was exactly described what Bob Lazar said. I thought that was interesting. Very interesting. Heard that before. Right. Yeah, I think he's absolutely right about it. I'm glad to see him finally being vindicated. And I think we're going to see more.
What amazes me about this is on national TV, he sort of spills the beans and says, yes, they have debris from crash UFOs in their possession. And the American people, nobody cares. It's like flatline. I figured, that's it. My phone's going to start ringing. People will email me. I mean, I had some people email me. A couple of people call. But it's not like this avalanche of, oh my gosh, what's going on?
No, mainstream doesn't care.
They don't care.
Only the fanatics.
Luis Elizondo stating that the United States had in its possession wreckage from crashed UFOs. Now, You're a researcher. I'm a researcher. I believe Roswell was not a weather balloon, especially after interviewing Dr. Jesse Marcel Jr. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I also talked to myself shortly before he passed away.
Same here.
And he was very convincing.
Very convincing.
So I've got all the books on Roswell, not all, because there were like 50. Oh, seriously, that is the main event, and I'm absolutely convinced that it was a valid event, not a weather balloon. And it was really interesting to see the Air Force try to backpedal around the bodies. You know, they said they're dummies, but there were no dummies at that time.
In 47, no crash, and that thanks the late Dr. Freeman, proved that.
Right. Yeah.
Did the research on that. Whoops, small details.
So yeah, the whole Roswell case is huge, and to hear the Pentagon using that term, otherworldly vehicles, was brilliant.
Where do you think the next step is? Where do you think the next?
I'm worried about the next step.
The next rung on the ladder is.
Yeah, because clearly the narrative is about the threat, not the potential threat, a threat. Okay? So everything is set to be responding to a threat. It's they are giving examples of in Italy where this UFO took down a helicopter, for example, as a threat. Also, a village that suffered some burning in the house, not much in the Brazilian cities.
Right.
And so again, it's a threat. The idea of the pilots don't know how to address or behave in the presence of those highly advanced vehicles also considered.
I know you've seen the clip. I've seen the clip. I forget the date, but it's an older clip. They're firing an intercontinental ballistic missile.
Yeah, that's in 64.
And it's in the States.
In the States.
So this thing is moving. All of a sudden, you get a UFO going like this around it, and it shoots it down. It's unbelievable.
That was Captain, I guess it was Captain Robert Jacobs. He was the head of that. He's a PhD. He's a professor. He was ordered to film the launch of a missile with a nuclear warhead, and they filmed it all through all the steps. And the next day, but he couldn't, with his naked eye, couldn't see the ultimate part of the atmosphere. Next day, he was ordered to be to address the commander in the base, and they took the clip on, and what we see, what he described, was the missile going that like up, and there comes a UFO, and this is all traveling at thousands of miles per hour, and it shows up here. It sets a beam to the warhead here, but always like this, and the missile goes down. Yeah, and he said he was asked not to talk about it in any way, and like it never happened. And two guys with civilian clothes took the film and
left the room. We hear this over and over and over again. It seems like, and we've talked about this off the record, it almost seems like the old guard that were alive in the days of Roswell, and maybe their direct underlings that were coming up through the ranks, all those people are gone. They're no longer in charge, or many of those people were gone.
Yeah, well, they had strict rules.
Right.
They had
but those rules are changing.
Yeah, eventually, well, this has a set, like 20 years, 25 years. So when it's time, they started talking, most of them. And eventually they know that, well, they are no longer inactive, so they will be less confronted with their colleagues. Same thing happens in Portugal, I guess. But it's interesting that in Portugal it's like a different reality. You see in the States, there's the cover-up.
Mm-hmm.
Even my colleague Robert Fleischmann in Germany, it's like taboo. You don't talk about it. He knew at a certain point that the government, the Bundestag, the parliament, German parliament, had a study about UFOs. He asked for through the FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, access to the study. They said there was no study, nothing else, nothing happened. So he knew there was a part of the Bundestag that really had access to that file. So he asked to get permission. They went to court. They argued that that department of the Bundestag was not could not be subpoenaed by a FOIA. They went to a higher court. They won, but they're still waiting for new development.
Good luck with that.
Yeah,
It's over.
it's exactly. In Portugal, you have not that much cases because we were not at war. We don't have atomic warheads. We don't have atomic bases, nuclear bases. But there are a few cases, very interesting, full of details, and you have the pilots coming even to TV and talking about it, and especially two former chief of staff of the Air Force.
This was conducted by the Air Force in 1982. The three pilots that saw the object, this type of object that played with the planes, and they did a very profound study about what they might have seen. And this is signed by the three pilots.
Knock, knock.
Who's there?
A wide range of sliding doors, only at Doors Plus. What?
Why the discrepancy? Go back to why. What am I looking
at? Because they wanted to know exactly the proportions of.
Oh, I see. Okay. Which ones did the pilot show? Okay.
Here, this one he said it was smaller. And this guy was the only guy that never wanted to be on camera.
Wow.
This is another case where the pilot almost lost the control of the plane when the UFO was here. He panicked, UFO, and his plane stopped working and fell. And he tried everything to get grab of the airplane again, and he eventually was able to. This is a report from the Air Force. This is Lieutenant Colonel. This man was also a NATO-based commander in Portugal.
The bottom line is too many people are seeing. I mean, there's just too many case after case after case. I mean, something's going on. This is a video that was shot several years ago in Michigan. The gentleman, firsthand information. We know that the flap took place. This is close encounters of the second kind, as the craft was very, very close to the ground. Multiple witnesses saw this. So we keep getting stories like this. It's incredible. But we also, when I actually filmed this, we had not had the first rung of the disclosure ladder. In other words, Commander David Fravor had not appeared yet on Tucker Carlson show, claiming that whatever he saw was not of this earth. That, of course, happened in December of 2017. This clip comes from a few years earlier than that. And yet what we see and what we hear from the witness is that this UFO was up close and personal right over the Miami International Airport. Here's his testimony.
Okay, so I came to work one day. I worked at Miami International Airport as an air traffic controller. I was a radar controller there at that time. And I came to work on an 11 to 7 shift, which means I came to work at 10:30 in the morning. And when I walked in the facility, the place was buzzing, like something had happened. I thought maybe somebody had died, but I said, so what happened? What's going on? They said, the midnight guys saw a UFO. I said, you're kidding. So I said, well, who was it that was on duty? So they told me. And well, obviously he was gone because he'd worked the midnight shift. So I was going to have to wait a few days to talk to this guy. When he came in, he did not want to talk about it. He was clearly spooked out of his mind. I mean, he was spooked. So I let it go. He said he wasn't going to talk, so I let it go. So about 2 weeks go by, and I came in to work at the position, and I was assigned Fort Lauderdale sector, and this fellow was down there too, and it was just he and I, and there was like nobody around us for about 30 feet. So we were working, and he looked over at me. I could tell he was thinking, and so he does the classic look around to make sure nobody's listening. He goes, "Okay, I'll tell you." He says it was about 6 o'clock in the morning, somewhere after 6. It was still dark, and I was getting ready to go home at 6:30. My replacement came up early to make the coffee, and there was an air traffic assistant up there too. So there was 3 of us sitting up there in the tower. And so the fellow made the coffee, and he walked over to the north side of the tower, and he looked, and he could see all the lights. But as he looked across the horizon, something was covering up the lights, and it was moving towards the facility. So he looks up at the radar, and sure enough, here comes this huge target across the scope. Now, the tower radars only have 20-mile range, so when they're moving fast, they really ka-chunk, 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 come across it. And he didn't even get the words out of his mouth, "What is that?" when the thing was right over the airport. Really low altitude, at the same altitude as the tower, so about 180 feet. And he went, "Oh my gosh." And so everybody, of course, they look at this and they're all staring at this thing. It's huge. So it's right over the midfield terminal, which is where all the commuter traffic were sitting. And there was some poor schmuck in a maintenance vehicle out there sleeping in his vehicle. This thing stopped, turned its light on, like just out of Close Encounters. And this truck is bathed in light. This guy freaks out, and they all have ground control frequencies in their vehicles so they can cross runways. And he starts swearing on the frequency. "What are you guys doing? I hate when you guys," because controllers like to play jokes sometimes. They use the light gun, but this was no light gun, and it wasn't a controller. And all of a sudden he realizes it's not the control tower. So he looks up, and he's just freaked. He just quits talking completely. So I asked, I said, "Well, how long was it, the light on for?" He said, 2 or 3 minutes. Now, it was dark to dusk, and it's getting lighter and lighter as this goes on. So this thing had been over the airport for a while. So at this point here, I stopped him. I said, "So, all right, tell me, how big was this thing, and what was its shape?" He said, "All right, Paul, it was the size of a 727. And it was like one of those flying wing shapes, almost like a boomerang." I said, "What color was it?" He said, "It was like a dark gray green." He goes, "So it shut its light off, and it just sat there for a few minutes. And then all of a sudden it went straight up. And it just so happened that there was an Eastern airliner coming in from the islands down from the south. Well, this thing went right by his wing. The pilot was really surprised. He swore on the frequency, which is something they never do. And that was the radar control was working him. He said, "What are you guys doing down there or up there?" And they said, "You're not going to believe it." So the airliner keeps going, and he goes out, and he comes back in, and he's starting to land his landing procedure. Well, this UFO has gone straight up over the airport, probably about 20,000 feet, and stops again. Now, this time, as it started to go up, there was a controller that was going to work the day shift, and a supervisor that was going to work the day shift. The controller was coming in from the north. He lived in my subdivision. And the supervisor was coming in from the south. They both saw it go up. So there's 2 more witnesses there, plus the pilots, and anybody that was on that side of the Eastern airplane that was awake saw it also. So the thing stops, and it starts to turn on lights, red, green, white, and it starts to tumble, just tumble. And so you can see these lights just gyrating. And so it did that for a couple minutes, and then it settled down, stopped, and went right out of the atmosphere.
Discover Italy and the Mediterranean and save 36% with TripADeal on a 19-day package from $4,999. This amazing deal includes return flights, MSC cruise, accommodation, and more. Visit tripadeal.com.au.
There's a lot of
a lot of still shots, a lot of videos, there's a lot of hoaxes on YouTube and other places, and you can spot them fairly easily. One of my favorite ones, which I believe is real, was shown on Fox News. This guy's up about 37,000 feet in a jet airliner. I'm sure you've seen it. And he's just kind of filming with his iPhone outside the window of the jet airliner. All of a sudden, this thing just kind of comes up through the clouds and then levels itself. And everybody's going, oh my gosh, what's that? So it's this cat and mouse game. We talked about this with Hugh Newman. This cat and mouse game has gone on literally for decades. And I'll just spill the beans. The way I look at this is from a biblical prophetic narrative. What I mean by that, the Bible is true. It's not the source of all truth. It doesn't have, breaking down what the DNA code is, but it is a source of truth. I believe it's the ultimate source of truth. So there's one scripture, prophetic scripture, which I find really interesting, which is in a book called Thessalonians. And it basically says, because they, and this is future, this is written 2,000 years ago, pointing towards the latter days, because they did not believe the truth, God sends them strong delusion. And so the first question we have to ask ourselves is, what is the truth? What is this truth that the Bible is referring to? In my opinion, it's the fact that Jesus Christ created everything. He spoke everything into existence. That's what Scripture tells us, which goes against the prevailing paradigm, both academia and the scientific community, and Darwinism, which says no, all this just evolved over millions or billions of years. There is no God, there is no supernatural. It's all evolution, and all this religious stuff is just mythos. But it's interesting how that Scripture pinpoints with great accuracy, in my opinion, exactly where we are. Now, some people will say, well, you're reading into that, LA, and maybe I am. But the question is, the second question would be, now that we know that they've abandoned the truth because they do not believe the truth, God sends them strong delusion. There's a term I've used called the coming great deception. And it's just kind of a long-winded question, but I have to set it up so you can respond to it. The neo-Darwinists are looking out there. They believe in the idea of panspermia, that we were seeded here by a race of advanced extraterrestrials. So if this is a deception, if it's a supernatural phenomenon that we're seeing, it fits the biblical narrative perfectly. If they really are from some other planet, then it doesn't, per se. I'm just saying. But if it's supernatural, then it's. What are your thoughts?
It depends. Do we have the same source or no? If there are different sources, if it's the same source,
when you say the same source,
that's sending these entities.
Okay, all right.
Assuming different
shapes, right?
Etc.
Which is what I believe.
The other hypothesis is that there's really something different. Panspermia is not necessarily the seed of life through extraterrestrials. It can be the seeding by meteorites and comets, etc. So they have found the ingredients of life, the organic materials in those comets. So it's could be. Although our planet is in reality, I mean, it's the abundance of life. It's so diverse that it's absolutely amazing and difficult to explain. Yeah, I concur. The deception part, it's difficult to me to debate that because we would have to consider Fatima. I can relate to that.
The Fatima apparition of 1917, in my opinion, was a UFO event. I've created 2 films on this. I'm going to show you first what happens at Fatima, and you'll see just the adoration and the worship of Mary. So there's a disclaimer here, there's a caveat that you need to know, that we never talk about Mary, we never talk about people's belief systems or Catholicism or any of that. We don't attack that. That's not what we're about. What we do drill into is the handwritten documents from 1917, where witness after witness looked up and saw a dull silver disc. I'm not making this stuff up. Here's a clip from our film, Fatima. The reason why I'm going to show you this is because this film is the only film that I'm aware of that actually shows the original glass plates taken by photographer Joshua Benolio in 1917. And it clearly shows, in my opinion, a disc-like object hovering over the apparition site. Here's the clip.
This is Simon. Simon wants to sell his home, but he doesn't.
You can relate to that deception.
And you and I worked on our films on Fatima, right?
The grays, I can relate to that. The tall whites, the Nordics, it's a little bit different. Okay? Eventually, crop circles could be a deception.
Crop circles, extremely enigmatic. No one knows really who was making them or why. They've been on the planet for hundreds of years. And we still really don't know who is behind it and what the message they're trying to convey to us. As a supernaturalist, I believe that there's a supernatural explanation. Perhaps the authors of these things are interdimensional beings which have been visiting us for thousands and thousands of years. I find it interesting that whoever is doing it, many crop circles are found next to megalithic ancient sites like we see all over England.
But cat mutilation, it's not a deception. It's just there.
It is what it is.
It is what it is. Skinwalker Ranch, it is what it is. Okay. Cat and mouse, Skinwalker Ranch, the entity does not want to stare. And the Indians knew for centuries that that was something that they would not go there. So it's not a deception. You just don't have to mess with it. So there could be different realities, different interpretations. It's difficult to say. I don't know. I wish I could know, but eventually we are limited to some sort of.
Richard Dawn wrote a book, AD after disclosure. Fascinating book, and he nails it because when they show up in force, let's say it's just not 1 mile-wide craft, it's several. And there's a bunch of scout ships running all over the place, and they're making crop circles and whatever. But the bottom line is that if we have that and the cameras are trained on it, everything changes. The entire world as we know it changes in a nanosecond.
Collapses.
Yeah, everything collapses.
Everything collapses. Not only the panic that was demonstrated in several experiments, Orson Welles, etc., that was replicated in several other radio stations across the world, worlds. But then economics. I mean, the stock market would go down. We have a new form of energy, new technology. So everything that the companies have been researching is put aside. So it will be a collapse, at least of the Western world. Yes, maybe the Indians in the Amazon or Africa will not notice, but we will face
it's a massive paradigm shift. Everything
massive paradigm
everything just changes. You know, there's a lot of channelers and new agers who are channeling entities, and of course, I believe that these entities are demonic. I mean, that's my worldview. They're saying that the event this disclosure is going to happen soon, but they've been saying this for years,
Exactly.
40 years.
Yeah.
You know?
One day they will be right, but
that's true.
We'll have to see. We'll have to see. Things are forwarding to a path, and I'm worried about the path of the threat. That's ATIP. No, it began initially with Bigelow 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 Aerospace Advanced Space Studies. Then when there was this funding from the American Congress, it changed for OSAP, Advanced Aerospace Weapons System Application Program. And then to justify more funding and to keep the congressman interest, they changed it for the threat. ATIP, Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. So, yeah, and Luis Elizondo has been talking about the threat. Not Commander Fravor. Commander Fravor, yeah. He's just amazed by all the capabilities of these advanced aerospace vehicles, as he called them. But nowadays, Tom DeLong, Luis Elizondo are talking about threats.
Where do you think all this is headed? I mean, we're on the 5th rung of the disclosure ladder. I really thought that, in my opinion, before you answer, in my opinion, I think that this is a scenario, footage from Roswell, where they're showing a debris, because you know there were cameras there. They're showing a debris field. They're showing the saucer, what's left of it. They're showing the retrieval of so-called alien bodies. Maybe one of the entities are alive, and they're showing that. What are your thoughts?
I'm coming home, baby. When things change, find your way home with listings added daily. I'm coming home, baby, now.
I hope so. That will be a real big step, I think. And yeah, I'm still a little jaded because I've waited so long for this.
So long, it's been decades.
And I'm kind of disappointed at just seeing films. I want to see actual craft. But if they can release that will, I think, be the thing that wakes people up.
Is that the tipping point?
Yeah, that's going to be. I mean, it already is mainstream now.
I reckon the UFOs are going to show up like Independence Day. They're coming through the clouds because there's already footage of that.
Yeah, it is.
But if that happens, it will be taught in schools. There will be classes about UFO history in colleges and high schools. And there already is in some. So this subject is finally getting some serious attention, and that will do it. And I can't wait, because there's not only Roswell footage, there's gun camera footage. There's a UFO that landed at Edwards Air Force Base.
Right.
I want to see that footage.
Demolition Forest.
Right. Or the 1954 meeting with Eisenhower. That's real, and I think it probably is.
Yeah, I think it is too.
Because the more information and more research that goes into this continues to corroborate it.
Thanks so much for watching the second free film in our ongoing series about UFO disclosure. Folks, I want to set the record straight here. We are now, as of April 7th, 2022, on the 6th rung.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about beforehand. I weren't sure what the story was, but I knew an embassy had been blown up. Guys, this one's over. I'm going to finish with this. Hang on. Where is it? Where is it? No, hang on, didn't load. Where is it? Where is it? There we go.
Dan, let's start with the Essendon Football Club last week. Dan, let's start with the Essendon Football Club. Last week, the big news, I might even venture to categorise it, perhaps one of the biggest line in the sand, big breaking stories that affects our culture here in Australia, where the Essendon Football Club's newly appointed CEO, Andrew Thorburn, was forced to resign due to his Christian beliefs and church involvement. You've obviously been monitoring that along too. What are your perceptions, Dan?
Well, it's an interesting one, Neil. I think it's useful for us to categorise this, in context. So first of all, Israel Folau 2019, that was about his freedom of speech. He said something. Then the Manly 7 earlier this year was about freedom from enforced speech. They didn't want to wear a jersey that said something. And now Andrew Thorburn, another football story, is about freedom of association. So Andrew has said nothing, but attends. In fact, he's the chairman of the board of City on a Hill in Melbourne. Now, and what is an issue here is his association. So I don't think it's very relevant, Neil, that he's the chairman of the board, because any church member, if he was merely a church member, they might have found out, well, you go to City on a Hill. They have said this in a sermon in 2013. What they said was homosexuality is a sin, but they, was a very supportive set of statements, and in there was the phrase homosexuality is a sin. They also said that, we look back and we grieve at the Holocaust. We may look back later and grieve in a similar way about abortion. That was the tone in which all that was said. So this was put to him, and he was basically asked, well, you have to choose your church or the football club, because what's said by City on a Hill, a church which you won't denounce, is inconsistent with our values. So he is being strung up for associating with a church that has orthodox Christian views. And my concern, Neil, is that if the Essendon Football Club is correct, if that's a correct thing to do, then any employer could target any church-going employee and, assert, well, the church you go to, their values are not consistent with the values of this organisation, so you have to go. So it's really a very low watermark for, I suppose, to trip a risk for basically anybody who goes to church.
Anyway, and guys, what's bad about this? The AFL Women's League, there's a women's league, they're doing a pride round this week, and the Muslim girl sits out of the match. She refuses to wear a pride jumper, but no one says anything about the Muslim girl.
One who goes to church. And I think you can assess whether you might be at risk, Dan, if your workplace has an inclusion and diversity policy. And there have been workplaces, departments have been working on these feverishly now for a number of years, trying to get all these things in place. And if your workplace actually has that sort of policy, then that probably puts you a little at risk, doesn't it?
Well, I think so. We don't want to be alarmist, but I don't think we are. We are in a situation now where being a Christian is a risky business, particularly if you're associating with a large corporation. Now, thankfully, not everyone is buying into this madness. I see today that Deloitte, Australia's chief executive, Adam Powick, has, defended Andrew Thorburn, said, look, this is wrong. Deloitte's, they'd be as, mainstream as any consulting firm. They're saying, look, when you get rid of Christians like this, you miss out on diversity and the different approaches that come with that, and this is wrong. So I'm glad he's not alone in this. I'm glad that we have other corporates speaking up for Andrew Thorburn, but it's concerning. And Neil, we have had, we launched a platform on Friday afternoon to allow people to write to the board of the Essendon Football Club, including its chairman and the AFL, and to say, look, this is absolutely not okay. This is not fair play. This is not something that we will tolerate. And so I imagine that the Essendon Football Club thought, well, look, we'll get a couple of days of bad headlines, then it will blow over. But in truth, over the course of the weekend, over 10,000 people have written to the club and to its board members complaining that Christians aren't welcome at the club and that football culture has become toxic, and making the point that, why should we be able to go to an Essendon football match but have to leave our faith at the gate? So these complaints are being made, and we are in the process of developing a petition to go to Prime Minister Albanese based on this, saying, look, people want him to bring in actual protections for freedom, freedom from this.
They're not going to do that.
Dismissal. So that's underway. You'll give people some relevant activity.
Then late last week, there were calls for reinstatement in the CEO role that came from the opposition leader, Peter Dutton, and there are calls or speculation that he might, undertake some level of legal action against the Essendon Football Club now. And given you've got this sort of legal background as a barrister, for listeners, where would that sit legally? Is it possible that he might pursue damages here, and should he? Because perhaps some are saying, well, unless you do fight for this right, it'll be completely lost.
Yep.
You're absolutely right. Religious belief or activity is a protected attribute under the Victorian Equal Opportunity Act, and that means that the employer cannot discriminate against an employee by reason of religious belief. So the law in Victoria is quite clear that he would have a cause of action.
Maybe Susan.
So whether or not he chooses, it's a matter for him. But he should not have to choose between his job and his religious activity. And other protected attributes, there are opinions, body, pregnancy. In other words, you don't have to choose between your job and these things. And for the Essendon Football Club, and my view is that to have put this choice to him, that does constitute unlawful discrimination. Now, I'm not a practicing lawyer. I don't have the final say on this, but I think the wording of the legislation is pretty clear.
Dan, you're a Victorian, and I can't leave a conversation like this without some reflection on the Victorian Premier, who was owning his own faith as a Catholic and thinks that holding positions on marriage and abortion that Andrew Thorburn holds to be abhorrent. Now, some are saying this is the height of hypocrisy, but isn't it the case that, if you're the Premier of a nation, of a state, as you are in Victoria, and you're holding to the views, or you're saying you're actually aligning yourself with the Catholic Church, that it's the same thing as Andrew Thorburn? Shouldn't the Premier be removed?
Well, on strict logic, yes, because no doubt the Pope and church leaders, including Archbishop Marzulli, would have a view that homosexuality is not in line with the Bible, practicing homosexuality, and that abortion is wrong. And so, yeah, if he aligned himself with Catholicism, he would be at risk. But what he actually said was that the comments that made on the City on a Hill website in 2013 in those sermons were bigotry, they were hatred, they were absolutely appalling. So he, is having a bet each way, if you like, but he is certainly coming down very hard on Andrew Thorburn and believes that he is unfit to have any senior leadership role in the Essendon Footy Club or anywhere else in society.
Dan, just to bring the pressure down here for listeners who might be concerned about holding these sorts of views, that these views that are under contention now, these are mainstream views on marriage and family and the value of life of a baby in the womb, and things that we talk about so often on a program like this, being pro-life, being pro-family. It certainly is a major change that these are no longer considered mainstream. That's something that some people will be very concerned about, but some might be thinking, maybe I need to revisit how I think about those views. What are your thoughts just for holding firm? Because those views are not going to be changing. They're still going to be the obvious views that we'll hold on to for generations to come.
And sin is still sin, so...
The I think as faithful Christians, we will be persecuted. And, you know, certainly compared to what happens in countries like Pakistan, you know, this is low-level persecution, but it is persecution nevertheless. So we shouldn't change our views. We should always seek to do our best to be faithful to Jesus, faithful to the Bible, faithful to the creation truth of male and female, and the importance of life at every stage. So we must remain faithful even under pressure. That is our Christian calling.
Dan, I think this is the biggest item to be talking about, but there's some other really significant ones. Let's touch on those perhaps quickly. But the March for the Babies on the weekend, how do you describe how the outcome of that was?
Look, it was pretty tumultuous, to be honest, Neil. Bernie Finn was speaking. He's a pro-life MP. The stage was stormed, and there was a tussle with Bernie on the stage. So there were quite a number of, pro-abortion activists who were very angry in the crowd, wearing devil's horns and, with some pretty horrible signs on their T-shirts, very activated. I think this is all because of Roe versus Wade being appealed in the US. So that's caused a lot of militancy in the pro-abortion movement, and they took vengeance really on the very peaceful mums and dads with babies in strollers at the March for the Babies in Melbourne on the weekend. It's not surprising given the repeal of Roe versus Wade, but it shows the difficult nature of the spiritual battle we are in. Obviously, our fight is not against these people. It's a spiritual battle, and it manifests through people often who are, quite broken themselves, who Jesus loves, but it's something we have to contend with. And that certainly was a battle very visible in Melbourne on Saturday.
Not just simmering along, but at times boiling over, this sort of anti-Christian, anti-life sentiment, and especially being seen in Victoria. You've got a state election coming up at the end of November. Any thoughts on how things are likely to work out with the state election? From what I understand it, Dan Andrews is not really facing a whole lot of stiff opposition, but what are your thoughts for the upcoming election?
Well, there's very strong, sentiment, and seems to be backing by polling that Daniel Andrews is quite safe. But in a sense, he's written his own campaign message saying that Christianity is bigotry, hatred, and absolutely appalling. And so I think he has certainly damaged himself here. Matthew Guy does not hate Christians. He definitely a fellow traveller with Christians. He hasn't been as strong as many would like, but that's quite different to Daniel Andrews, who's been quite militant against Christians. And so I think over the last week, for Christians, Daniel Andrews himself has done the work of designing the messaging that will be deployed, no doubt, by many Christian groups in the lead up to this election.
I noticed there's, at least the opposition in Victoria has got a bit of a headline on reducing the cost of a fare on the train system in Melbourne. There's some things there that some are talking about as positives. Those are not faith issues so much, but so far as these sorts of issues and Matthew Guy as a potential alternative premier, does he have a chance, do you think, in your estimation?
Look, if he was successful, he would have to beat all the polling that is available. And, there's a question about, well, would the Andrew Thorburn incident be relevant at the election? Look, it might be. I know the Christians will mobilise on this. And what will be, I think, important for us to do, Neil, is to do some sort of polling now about views, and then do that polling at the end of the campaign and just see to what extent this message has cut through. I would think this will have the impact of reducing the margin in his own seat of Mulgrave. Christians will be active in Mulgrave, and there's no doubt that the statements that he made last week describing beliefs that almost all of the churches have in Melbourne as bigotry will have an impact.
Time's running short. Let me ask you about one more very important issue, Dan. And that is the fact that the Australian Christian Lobby has now been designated as a hate group. What are your initial reactions to that?
Wow, I never knew that.
Well, it's this is something by a US organisation and pro-life groups and pro-family groups like the Heritage Foundation get listed in these lists. It's produced by the Southern Poverty Law Centre, who create these lists to basically try to shame pro-family, pro-life groups. At the end of the day, to do that to Australian Christian Lobby is defamatory, it's divisive, and it's just completely untrue. And, this is a left-wing extremist group from America who are basically saying Christians are the problem. And, we're honestly, we have had enough of this, and in a sense, ACL, we're pretty robust, but while we get named in that way in the same week, Andrew Thorburn gets booted from his football club. So, I suppose all the Christians are in this this group, or this category of inverted commas promoting hate. So it is time for the Albanese government to put some real protections in place for people of faith, and we are calling on the Albanese government to do just that.
And for listeners to keep up with where this project would go so far as religious discrimination and protection for believers, I'll encourage you to keep checking the Australian Christian Lobby website. They've got updates on their pursuit of those plans. Dan Flynn is Deputy Director of the Australian Christian Lobby. The ACL website is acl.org.au. The Australian Christian Lobby, acl.org.au, and there may be some ways that you can take action on some of these things we're talking about today and be a part of the solution and not just a bystander. acl.org.au. Dan Flynn, thanks so much for sharing your thoughts with us today on 2020.
That's my pleasure, Neil. Thank you.
Okay, I'll do one more, guys, and it's along the same lines. Then I'll hang up. There it is.
The Manly Seven. G'day, I'm Martin Isles, and this is The Truth of It. Well, I think every Australian knows about it by now, that the Manly Sea Eagles, the National Rugby League team, introduced a pride jersey with the rainbow emblem on it for their players to wear at an upcoming match. And in a courageous move, 7 of the players declined to do so by reason of their faith and conviction, and they have therefore been stood down for the match. Now, the theme that has been pushed by the officials, the media, the various advocates of the pride...
And guys, just a little bit of tidbit. Manly never won a game for the rest of the year after this.
Jersey is inclusion. That's the word we're seeing absolutely everywhere. They say that wearing this jersey was about inclusion. Just one quote, however, should demonstrate how incomprehensible this is. This is Peter V'landys, the chairman of the NRL, and he has said this, quote, "Everyone knows the position of the game. If you don't want to be inclusive, you can stand down. The game will always be for everyone." Yeah, it hurts my head too. I'll read it again. Everyone knows the position of the game. If you don't want to be inclusive, you can stand down. The game will always be for everyone. So apparently it's for everyone, but you can stand down.
Yeah.
It's doublespeak, it's brain dead nonsense. It cannot be inclusive from the get-go to force somebody to identify with a political symbol. Is it inclusive to force an Aboriginal player who doesn't want to wear an Australian flag? Would we do that? Or any player indeed to wear a cross or an ichthus, a Christian fish, or a hammer and sickle, or a feminist symbol, or a black fist, or a Star of David, or the logo of a political party? The pride rainbow is another political symbol. It's no different. And if you say you must wear this or else there'll be consequences, that's the dead opposite of inclusiveness. That's
trying to get rid of the
right?
glare.
Inclusion is accommodating people's convictions. You may make an argument, you may make an appeal, you may try to convince people, sure, but human nature is still such that differences of conviction
I can't do
persist.
nothing about it.
At that point, live and let live is as inclusive as it gets. And it works pretty well, and it was working pretty well at Manly.
Thanks, man.
White guys, non-white guys, gay guys, straight guys, all united around the sport. Now they're divided and they're excluded. 7 of them are excluded in the name of inclusion. It's doublespeak. Only a person without an IQ could say it, or a person who knows they're double-speaking, and this is the more likely, but is doing it for a political agenda. And then you get the third category of person, not naming names, but a weak person who is interested in their own status and career. A person who believes in little outside of his own destiny, so he'll say whatever it takes to preserve that destiny. The kind of person, the kind of man our political and our corporate systems are currently absolutely blighted by. Not like the 7 men of conviction who quietly, confidently, boldly said no, despite the potential cost. And it was a risk. I mean, we all remember surely when Israel Folau transgressed the Pride movement, he was hunted out of the country. He now has to play in Japan. Some have criticised the man, and that's, by the way, despite being the best player. So anyway, some have criticised the Manly 7 for saying no to this new Pride rainbow jersey, yet accommodating other things like gambling and alcohol sponsorships, to which I want to reply this. You're doing what the Pride lot are doing. You're asking why these guys don't share your conscience and convictions, and you're punishing them for it in a context where it is not relevant, namely the playing of a sporting match. See, that is not how conscience issues work. Their line is not your line, of course. Very few people have exactly the same line, but tolerance is respecting people's lines, even when they're different to your line. But having said that, I am going to engage with the point for a second. It isn't relevant to the issue of respecting conscience, but it is relevant to the theological nuts and bolts going on in the minds of any Christian person who would say that. The Christians who are thinking that way are making quite a serious error. They've put all of these things on the same level. They're not on the same level. Take a brand of beer. Yes, beer is a big problem. Scripture contains many warnings about beer, about alcoholic beverages. But alcoholic beverages in and of themselves are not sinful. The 6-coloured Pride rainbow represents something concerning which that qualification cannot be made. Indeed, there are very few things which Scripture treats more seriously and takes more gravely, and I think that we too often like to sweep that fact under the carpet. But let's come back to the fact that they did draw a line in the sand. They did say no. I want to make a comment about this because I think there's a lesson in it for us all. When Daniel in Scripture stood firm and said no, he drew a line alongside 3 of his friends in Babylon, and he stood apart at potentially great cost, not just to his career prospects, although they were an issue, but also, it seems from reading the text, that there was some concern for his life. He would have been widely criticised, widely doubted, widely misunderstood, and widely questioned for his stand. I know that because none of the youths joined in the protest except Daniel and his 3 friends. Why not? Well, partly, I'm sure, because their destinies were at stake. They were being offered great place, power, and political status. They were on the fast track to all of these things. That's why they were in the university course that they were in. And when you get men who believe in little more than their own destinies, you get men who compromise. You actually get weak men. You get the kind of men who currently dominate our political and corporate systems. And that is why they're closing their eyes to the advance of evil. That is why they are successful, very successful at self-advancement and total failures at advancing the common good. I very much agree with Dr. Jordan Peterson, who says, if you think strong men are dangerous, wait until you see what weak men will do.
Wow.
Daniel was a strong man, one of the quintessential examples of a strong man in the Bible, because he knew something. He knew that he could not control destiny and his destiny better than God could. And he knew that by not compromising, he was putting his future in God's hands, not his own. And in that respect, his obedience was an act of faith. It was to trust God for the outcome, not himself. And that is strength in submission. That is the definition of meekness, one of the character traits of the kingdom of heaven, according to Jesus in Matthew 5. That is true strength. And I believe the obedience of the Manly 7 is an act of faith and meekness. And importantly, when Daniel did it, he was right. And it was the first day of the rest of his life because God did see it. God did honour it. And that faith was not misplaced. And it was not that his life was always easy. It absolutely, certainly was not. But he was preserved and used for God in a hostile place.
Okay, Manly played 7 more games after that Pride round, and they never won another game. And they're a strong team. They should have been in the finals, but they collapsed after this and didn't even make the finals.
And the testimony of Daniel and his friends in Babylon, it was really tremendous. It seems a king was converted because of him. He spoke truth to power. He demonstrated godliness to his peers in an idolatrous and a very, very ungodly society. The Bible records his story with which has blessed countless people for millennia.
Mhm.
What a guy. We need men like that today. Men who believe in something greater than their own destiny. Men who are strong. Men who live in obedience to God no matter what. And the testimony that will come from that will transform this Babylon, Australia, and where we are right now. And you'll be used for things that are far greater than yourself,
Amen.
even for eternal things. Please, and I'm speaking specifically to Christians now, prepare yourself to be this person. Be inspired by Izzy Folau. Be inspired by the Manly Seven. Be inspired by Daniel. Daniel purposed in his heart beforehand to make the decision that he made. We would be wise to stop living in denial that this shouldn't happen and that this mustn't happen, and to acknowledge that this is actually part of the Christian life, as the New Testament tells us over and over and over again. All who seek to live godly in Christ Jesus will suffer persecution, says the Apostle Paul. It will happen. We need to accept that it will happen, and we need to purpose in our heart before it happens that we will be the one who stands firm on the day in which it does happen. As the Apostle Paul says, to be having done all, to stand and to stand firm. And just as a footnote, never underestimate the impact. And it might not be the impact you're expecting, but here's just one impact that I've noted from this sporting team issues over the last few years. I note that these guys have been treated far, far, far more lightly than Israel Folau was, partly because there's 7 of them, I know, but partly because I wonder whether some little space has opened up because of the tremendous cost to the sporting codes of the Israel Folau issue, because Israel stood firm. Some little space has opened up, however small, for such men to keep their careers when they stand firm. And that's because of Daniel went first, a man who I greatly respect in Israel Folau. Mark my words, it is our continued boldness in the face of these things that will leave an impact. We need men like Daniel.
Amen.
I'm Mark Niles, and that was The Truth of It.
Okay, guys. I'm out. God bless. Have a good night. See you tomorrow.